Chapter 766. Phew. The taste is indeed different. In the narrow room, Wang Wu sighed and then looked at the messy cups and plates on the table in front of her. Her smile was slightly bitter. The big black dog meat that Xiaoqi cared about was indeed extraordinary, delicious, and very unique. How could the dog meat of the dignified Dixian not taste unique? It was only by following Xiaoqi that she had the opportunity to eat such a good meat. Although Wang Wu was not as greedy as Xiaoqi, she was usually not bad at wine, women, avarice, and temper. She was also a glutton. This food was definitely a surprise. However, she was not happy, because the joy of enjoying the food could no longer be shared. Instead, it added a sense of melancholy at the time of parting. Looking at the empty chair across the table, Wang Wu's heart was slightly suffocated. She never regretted doing things and never felt guilty. But it did not mean that she would never feel sad and could always smile. After a long silence, she picked up the wine glass, toasted the empty seat across from her, and then drank the wine in one gulp. I'll go meet that visitor from the outer space. I'll use his head as a farewell to you. With that, Wang Wu threw the wine glass on the table and stepped forward. The next moment, she disappeared without a trace. At this moment, a big black dog with 4 broken limbs raised its head at the side of the table, its body a mess of flesh and blood. She actually went? What a big courage, just a mere king pill. Even if she's an outsider, her courage is too big. What on earth is she relying on? While thinking about it, the door of the room suddenly opened and a bald man quietly came in. When he saw the messy cups and plates on the table and the bloody big black dog on the ground, he could not help but laugh. Black? Oh Black, your tragic appearance makes me distressed. Once upon a time you were an all-powerful figure in the city of immortals, but now you've actually fallen to this. It really makes people laugh until their liver hurts. Speaking of which, how does it feel to be cut alive? Black naturally ignored this kind of provocation. He just frowned and said, "Where have you been? Where else can I go? Of course I fled. Fortunately I was alert enough. Although I didn't recognize them when I was drugged, I subconsciously changed my appearance. Plus, they didn't guard against me. If I were caught like you, I'm afraid I would not be able to escape the fate of being cut alive." Luo Xiao shook his head, stepped forward, and stuffed a golden pill into the black dog's mouth. A moment later, the wound on the black dog began to heal slowly. However, Luo Xiao frowned and said, "How come the effect is so slow? This restoring spirit pill is for cultivators. For you native dog, king black dog, king and dragon Li it." The dog sneered and said, "It's just the diminishing effect of the medicine. Why are you making such a fuss? In order to continue to cut my flesh, those 2 people kept feeding me healing pills. I've eaten no less than 100 of these restoring spirit pills in your hand. Of course it has no effect now. Don't worry about me, I won't die. Those 2 people have spared my life. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not worried about you at all. You brought this upon yourself. I can only gloat over your misfortune." Luo Xiao said with a smile, "The point is, since they can even let go of such a heinous person like you, then they shouldn't care about what I, a little baldy, have done, right? If I think about it carefully, it's nothing more than murdering my master. But that's actually a tacit understanding. Shijiujin deliberately sent me to kill him. If I don't do it, wouldn't I be letting him down? On the contrary, taking you down is a great credit." Then Luo Xiao asked, "Then what about them?" "One of them left early and disappeared. The other one just left to find trouble with the fallen immortals." "What a big nerve!" Luo Xiao exclaimed. "What is the origin of the number 1 king pill in 9 regions? Why do I feel that she's even more shameless than Taoist he too? Even Kuchin of the royal soldier sect wouldn't dare to easily deal with the fallen immortals, right?" With that, Luo Xiao looked at the wine pot on the table and said, "Is Wang Wu drunk? She drank a lot, but she's very sober. I'm afraid she's really sure. I really underestimated her before. I always thought that she was at most a supreme, but now it seems that she's bottomless." With that, Black's eyes sank. "But the Kanglin immortal is not so easy to deal with. Our plan needs to be adjusted as soon as possible. What the hell is this place?" In the extremely cold place, Wang Wu stood on her flying sword in the sky. Being blown by the cold wind, she couldn't help but shiver. This wind, when did it become so strong? Wang Wu's non-phase method could be said to be unparalleled in the world in terms of defensive ability. Even without the non-phase sword defense, her jade mansion and body were far more tenacious than imagined. Neither cold nor heat could invade her, and no poison could invade her. However, just now a gust of cold wind made her shiver, which showed how heavy the chill was. If it were an ordinary king pill cultivator, her jade mansion would have been frozen and her body would have collapsed. The extreme north was a dangerous place in 9 regions. Under the extreme cold, all living things would die. This was the common sense that everyone in the immortal cultivation world knew. However, for tens of thousands of years, there were actually countless cultivators who dared to break into this dangerous place, so they had a deep understanding of this area. It was not the first time for Wang Wu to come here, so she knew very well that the wind here should not be so cold. At least, before going deep into some real dangerous place, the wind in the north would still leave some leeway. Now this bone-chilling wind made people feel as if they had gone deep into some nodes of the surrounding spiritual energy, and the climate had become extreme. Looking up, the stars in the north were dim. The positions of several main stars had impressively changed, and the astronomical phenomenon was also completely chaotic. Sure enough, an evildoer has come. Even the astronomical phenomenon is chaotic. Wang Wu muttered to herself, looking at the light of the stars, and gradually lost in thought. The North Star is swaying and moving northward. This is the sign of Earth splitting. Hey, why is there another North Star here? Then what is this one that I recognize now? Big Dipper? No, the Big Dipper is obviously over there. Hey, is that the Sirius Star? But what about the ones around it? Forget it, I don't recognize it. In any case, it's chaotic. Wang Wu shook her head and gave up doing something that she was not good at. When the fallen immortal came, it was normal for there to be a worldly phenomenon. Moreover, she was not good at astronomy, so she wanted to infer more information from the movement of the stars. Of course, she was not very good at geography. Compared with a certain talented and knowledgeable senior brother, her knowledge was really weak. However, relatively speaking, she also had her own advantages. She had more than 160 years of accumulation. Over the years, she had traveled all over the country and seen too much. Although very few people came to the bitter and cold land in the extreme north, she had been here in the past and even explored it. However, when she linked what she saw in front of her with the memories of that year, she was surprised to find that. What is this place? Several landmark towering mountains were still there, but the corresponding large glacier had disappeared without a trace. Moreover, according to the location of the mountains, the place where she was at should also be a high ground, not a large basin that had sunk hundreds of meters deep like it was now. The terrain is also chaotic, and the surrounding spiritual energy is exhausted. Wang Wu took a gentle breath and confirmed her judgment. It really is the work of the fallen immortal, cutting off the providence of 9 regions for their own use. It seems that what the black dog said is right. He should have lost a lot of power when passing through the passage, so if I want to kill you, I have to do it secretly. After a sinister smile, a blood-stained sword tip appeared on Wang Wu's chest. Behind her, a cold figure slowly emerged. How dare you? I didn't kill you, but you bastards dare to come to my door. Do you think you can hide from me just because you cultivate the outside path? Insignificant skill, not worth mentioning. With that, the man swung his sword, trying to shake off the corpse on the sword. However, he found that the sword was heavy, as if it was pressed by a mountain. No, it was more than a mountain. With the strength of his wrist, even if there was a mountain, it would be overturned. However, at this time he felt that the sword was getting heavier and heavier, which actually made the sword bent. He saw that the woman whose chest was pierced by the sword was holding the tip of the sword and twisting her body backward. Her smiling face was stained with blood, which was indescribably ferocious. I finally tricked you out, you treacherous villain. Kanglin, if you have any last words, say them and let me have some fun. Kanglin was shocked and furious. His sneak attack just now was not ordinary. Seriously injuring the body was secondary. The key point was that it had shattered the opponent's king pill. Although she was an outside path cultivator, her cultivation still revolved around the king pill. It was just that the efficiency of using it was extremely high, unlike the ordinary king pill. However, the king pill had shattered, and her cultivation was finished. So where did she get the strength to hold the immortal sword? The king pill had been shattered, so why didn't she die? Kanglin was shocked and furious, but his movements were also extremely fast. He put down the sword in his hand without hesitation, and his body became transparent. If he missed his target in one strike, he would flee. This was Kanglin's favorite way of fighting. Even if his strength was far superior to his opponent, he would not waste any energy to engage in a head-on fight. What's more, this time, his opponent was not only an inexplicable outside-path female cultivator. He still clearly remembered the huge puppet that came here half a day ago, and the purple cloud around the puppet. At that time he had just finished his arrival. Although it was the time when his power was the weakest, it was also the time when his heart was the highest. In his view, when he came from the upper realm to this weak and lowly 9 regions, even if his power was not fully restored, so what? Who here could stop his supreme immortal method? Then when the giant divine weapon came, he clearly heard his intuition warning him that he must not fight. If he fought, he would be defeated, and if he lost, he would die. If he died, it would delay the great plan of the upper realm's arrival. Kanglin never thought that there was such a tyrannical existence in today's 9 regions, which actually forced him to retreat and hide. After that, he spent half a day plundering the province of the polar region and quickly restored his strength. He boasted that he could beat the giant divine weapon, but even if he won, he would have to pay a big price. If he was attacked by the two at the same time, it would be a real headache. Therefore, he decided to retreat, even if this decision made him mad and his immortal heart was about to burst. However, when Kanglin took a step back, he felt that an invisible force stopped him. It was a circular sword defense with a radius of about 30 meters, which isolated the inside and outside, and could not be entered or exited. Want to run? It's not that easy. In front of him, Wang Wu grinned and pulled out the whole sword from her chest, revealing a big bloody hole in her chest, but she didn't care. I've waited for 160 years, and finally, I've waited for this opportunity to kill the fallen immortal and avenge my brothers and sisters. Thanks to Satsujinki's continuous read. It's so gorgeous. Look at me on the weekend. Chapter 767. Boom. On the snowy tundra, the earth quaked and the mountains shook. The 10,000 years thick glacier cracked with a loud rumble and crushed stones rolled down. At the center of the shock was a several hundred feet deep pit. The 10,000 years old mysterious ice was harder than steel, but at this time it was deeply sunken. In the center, Kanglin Immortal knelt on one knee, his face full of anger. You madman! The next moment, a golden ball of light fell from the sky like lightning and blasted straight at the top of Kanglin's head. This immortal with infinite magical ability cursed, but he couldn't avoid it. He was smashed down more than 100 feet deep. Moreover, he knelt on one knee, no longer able to maintain his standing posture. In the deep pit, the white jade-like mysterious ice was full of red blood. But it was not Kanglin's blood, ha ha ha. Accompanied by Wang Wu's wild laughter, the sky seemed to be raining blood. The pitter-patter poured out a blood-red pattern in the deep pit. It was the blood that flowed from the wound on her chest. She was plotted against by Kanglin. Her chest was pierced by a sword, and the wound could not be healed. The body that had been tempered by non-phase method should be best at recovery and defense. However, the immortal sword used by Kanglin was not a small matter. The slaughter sword extinguished the vitality of all living things. Even if it was a flood dragon, once it was cut by the slaughter sword, it would bleed and lose its vitality. Not to mention that Wang Wu's heart and King Pill were pierced by the opponent's full-strength sword, which was clearly a fatal injury that should have killed her long ago. However, at this time, Wang Wu stubbornly endured the fatal injury and crazily fought with Kanglin. Run, don't you like to run? You can run out of my 30 feet sword defense, but there's still my heaven and earth sword defense. If you can run out of it, I'll consider you capable. Wang Wu laughed wildly and brandished the immortal sword in her hand. Once again, she weaved a golden ball of light and swooped down on Kanglin. What bullsh *T heaven-earth sword defense? Kanglin gnashed his teeth, his eyes bloodshot. Previously, he had used an immortal spirit talisman to forcefully open up space and escape from Wang Wu's sword defense. However, he did not expect that this would fall into his opponent's trap. The moment he left the sword defense, Wang Wu controlled the sword defense with a radius of 300 feet and rushed towards him like a comet. Upon contact, Kanglin's body shook violently, and he almost vomited blood on the spot. His opponent did not use any flashy techniques, nor did he possess any profound immortal Tao laws. He was purely relying on brute force to charge forward. However, his strength was unbelievably great, and his speed was so fast that it made one's scalp go numb. The most detestable thing was that no matter what kind of divine ability he used to escape, he would be locked on at the first moment, caught up to and tangled with. Kanglin actually thought of using the great teleportation technique to fly directly to another corner of 9 regions. However, thinking of the giant divine weapon that had retreated in advance, he did not dare to leave the polar snowfield without authorization. Only in this land where he had plundered the providence could he really use. If it were any other place, it would be very difficult for him to use it as he wished, which was tantamount to losing the geographical advantage. Boom! After another collision, the ground under Kanglin's feet completely cracked open, revealing a gully that led to an endless abyss. This was because he had completely dispersed the huge force on top of his head to the ground under his feet. However, even so, his whole body still felt slightly numb. The brute force of the opponent was simply incredible. He was an immortal. Even if his current state was only 30 to 40% of his peak, it was still far better than any creature on this lowly continent. Whether it was the quality of the immortal spirit or the toughness of the body, the immortal realm had already surpassed the understanding of the mortal world. However, at this moment, he was actually suppressed by the brute force of an ordinary person from 9 regions. You're crazy. Kanglin Immortal clenched his fists to dispel the numbness in his body. Although he was angry about his current disadvantage, he was not afraid. Because although he was in a difficult situation, how could the opponent be better than him? The woman in front of him seemed to have the upper hand, but her white robe had already been soaked with blood. Under the endless brute force collision, every time the recoil force hurt her, the injury became more serious. The muscles all over the woman's body were torn, and blood gushed out from everywhere. Her 2 arms were bent unnaturally, and the bones had long been broken. In a fight between cultivators, there was rarely such a tragic scene. However, at this point her madness was still undiminished. She flew up to the sky while laughing, and then swooped down again. Holding the sword with both hands, she fiercely collided with Kanglin. This time Wang Wu's entire left hand flew out. The broken bone and torn muscle could be clearly seen. Her right hand was black and purple, which seemed to be completely necrotic. You're crazy. On the other side, it was also not easy. Kanglin clearly felt that the providence of 9 regions that he had gathered with great difficulty had been scattered a little. However, a madman was still a madman. After several rounds of collision, although Kanglin had suffered some injuries, they were not serious injuries. However, how could the opposite side only suffer injuries? Looking at her increasingly dim eyes, Kanglin knew that she was like a dried-up oil lamp. Therefore, he sneered, stretched his numb wrist, and then pulled out a thin sword from his sleeve, intending to step forward and give her a quick death. However, at this time, he suddenly heard a crisp sound of bones twisting and colliding. Wang Wu was like a marionette, controlled by an invisible force. Every twisted part of her limbs was forcibly corrected, and the joints twisted and burst. Her left arm that had just been cut off recovered at an astonishing speed. In her jade mansion, the broken king pill also glowed with light again. This? Kanglin's eyes widened as he incredulously watched the woman in front of him come back to life. The shock in his heart was like a raging sea. The dead could not be resurrected. This was an iron law that could not be disobeyed in the upper realm. Just now the woman was obviously a dried-up oil lamp, her vitality was extinguished, but in the blink of an eye, she actually came back to life? This was already like a miracle. The one who just fought with you is Yu. The next one is me. It was still the same body, the same face, but the tone and words were obviously different. This sudden change was simply hair-raising. However, Kanglin had no time to think so much, because the opponent had started a new round of offensive. Her fighting style was completely different from the previous one, but it was still as difficult to deal with. Wang Wu was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing around Kanglin. The golden non-phase sword defense was used as a camouflage prop by her. From time to time, She propped up several sword defenses around the opponent, making it difficult for the opponent to determine her exact position. Then, taking advantage of the flaw revealed by Kanglin, she launched another thunderous blow. This fighting style was also unimaginable. Her strongest defensive sword technique was used as a camouflage illusion, and when she really made her move, she was often exposed outside the protection of the sword defense. This time, Kanglin Immortal spent a lot of effort to cause 2 fatal wounds to Wang Wu. One was to cut off her legs, making her completely lose her mobility. The other was to burn her forehead, which was burned by the heavenly fire. The scorch mark went from the forehead to the back of the head. But soon Wang Wu came back to life again, with a warm and charming smile on her face. Humph, if I knew that Zhang Miao, that dead-end scholar, was also useless. I'll go next, are you ready? The woman's demeanor was charming, as if she was using her charm skill. However, Kanglin Immortal did not feel his heart at all. Instead, he really experienced the taste of fear. Looking at the blood-soaked woman in front of him, with a red robe, he began to subconsciously want to retreat. This guy, what exactly is her background? Chapter 768. The battle in the extreme north did not last long. However, for Kanglin Immortal it was really like a year, and every moment was extremely difficult. He had just arrived and absorbed the providence of 9 regions wantonly, so the immortal spirit in his body was unstable, and his condition was not suitable for a protracted battle. It was just that, at that time he thought how much effort it would take to deal with an outside path cultivator, so he made a thunderous blow. However, he didn't think that although that sword strike seriously injured the opponent, it also made his feet deep in the mud, and he couldn't struggle free. Get out of here! Along with Kanglin's roar, the violent immortal spirit turned into a true word technique and smashed forward. In an instant, Wang Wu's figure flew like lightning toward the snow-covered mountains. The earth quaked and the mountains shook, and the thousands of meters tall mountain broke from the middle. However, Wang Wu's momentum didn't stop. She flew upside down in the air for a long time before she slowly stopped. After being hit by a true immortal-level immortal technique, Wang Wu's condition was so miserable that it was unbearable to look at it. Most of the bones in her body were broken into pieces, and a large piece of flesh on both sides of her waist was scraped off. In the wound, one could even see the pale and cracked spine. Generally speaking, there was almost no other choice for a cultivator to suffer such a serious physical injury. However, Wang Wu just took a deep breath, and these fatal injuries began to heal rapidly. The dim king pill in her jade mansion also began to shine again. Dozens of miles away, Kanglin Immortal's head began to swell with pain again. How many times had this happened? Was this guy really unkillable? Every time he inflicted a fatal injury on her, she would recover quickly, and then, as if she was a different person, she would fight fiercely with a new tactic and immortal method. Even if she didn't care about her life, she still wanted to cause damage to him. From the beginning to the end, she had killed her at least 10 times. The most ferocious time even divided her into 2 parts from her shoulder to her crotch, and her jade mansion was also smashed. However, in just a few breaths she was brand new. However, this kind of resurrection was obviously limited. There was no immortal person in the world. Even in the immortal world, there were people who lived, grew old, and died. How could someone in a mere 9 regions transcend this reincarnation? Every time she came back to life, she would change her personality. She probably gathered the lives and cultivation of many people together. It looked like a single person, but it was actually an amalgamation of many lives. He wasn't fighting a single person but a group of people. However, the number of people in this group was limited. If he couldn't kill her 10 times, he would kill her 100 times or even 1,000 times. But the problem was, firstly, his time was precious and he did not want to waste it on this lunatic. Secondly, if this battle dragged on for too long, it would be troublesome if the giant soldier god was attracted. That was why Kanglin Immortal was having a headache. It seemed like the only thing he could do now was to gather enough power to crush her into powder. However, the side effects of doing so were also great. On one hand, it would disrupt the rhythm of his recovery, and on the other hand, it was very likely to provoke that giant soldier god. The moment of hesitation allowed Wang Wu to smoothly return to normal. But in the next moment, her performance made Kanglin instantly make up his mind. Phew, after resting for so long, it's finally my turn again. Are you ready for a beating, little friend? Ha 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 ha. This arrogant and unrestrained laughter was very familiar. Wasn't it the personality with the shocking brute force at the start of the battle? Hearing this laughter, Kanglin Immortal's heart instantly turned cold. The other party was not dead at all. After each of her personalities was seriously injured, they would take turns to rest. In a short hour, they would recover to their original state. This was a battle of attrition. Not a battle of attrition. It seemed like he was the one being exhausted. Although the immortal essences were not fundamentally injured, he could not afford to waste time. After realizing this, Kanglin naturally knew what to do. He took another breath, and this breath scraped an inch of the ground within a radius of 100 miles. Then he spat it out again. Instantly the sky was filled with sparkling crystals, as bright as the stars. But in this magnificent scene, there was endless murderous intent. The true immortal's breath was unimaginably cold. This breath of cold air was like a long spear and a sharp sword. In one breath it pushed forward 100 miles of ice. Although Wang Wu was tens of miles away, she was instantly enveloped by this cold air, and completely stopped moving. Kanglin waited for a moment. After making sure that his opponent could not move anymore, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. That breath of cold air just now had used his original strength. In a situation where he had just descended, his strength was greatly depleted. In fact, it was a little painful. But to be able to solve this problem, it was worth it. However, just as he heaved a sigh of relief, he heard an ear-piercing crack. Crack, crack, crack. It was like the cracking of ice. Kanglin was shocked to see that the 100 miles of ice in front of him was actually disintegrating bit by bit. That was the breath of an immortal. Although it was not a complete breath, this breath was enough to linger in this place for 1,000 years. Within 1,000 years, this 100 miles of land would be a land of ice. But in just a few breaths of time it was already beginning to collapse? Just how strong was the heretic cultivator who was sealed in ice? Could it be that her Tao could offset the Tao of an immortal? Isn't this a little too inconceivable? Kanglin was shocked, but he did not hesitate when he made up his mind. Another breath of cold air was released, completely freezing the 100 miles of long corridor. Both time and space were locked, and this breath of air finally completely immobilized Wang Wu. But Kanglin also felt a wave of fatigue. It was obvious that he was unable to make ends meet. Then he thought about how this battle had already lasted for a full hour. Although he had been deliberately controlling the changes in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the beginning to the end, it was difficult to guarantee that the giant soldier god would not notice it. After dealing with this troublesome woman, the next step was to speed up his recovery. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. Without hesitation, Kanglin released his protective immortal treasure. A misty veil wrapped around him. The veil trembled like rolling waves. Each wave could dissolve the attack of a landslide or tsunami. Layers of waves stacked together, and the defense was impregnable. This was the real trump card that Kanglin had brought with him when he arrived. Previously, when he fought fiercely with Wang Wu for an hour, he did not release the veil even when he was slightly injured several times. But now, in the face of unknown danger, he did not hesitate. The veil had just been released when it was suddenly pierced by a ray of heavenly light. This immortal treasure had a spirit and sensed the danger in advance. In an instant it trembled violently. Layers of waves stacked up and concentrated on one point of defense. But it still could not withstand the aurora that descended from the sky. The waves were shattered one by one, and the artifact spirit of the veil was forced to show its figure, revealing a painful expression. Fortunately, the veil received support from its master in the next moment. Kanglin Immortal reached out and placed his hand on the veil. Releasing his immortal spirit, he quickly strengthened the veil's defense and repaired the broken waves. The aurora lasted for a moment before it could not continue and slowly disappeared. But Kanglin also felt exhausted, and his wrist was numb. At the same time, on top of the sky, a towering figure released a shocking sense of oppression, making his breathing slightly stagnant. Kanglin clenched his teeth and trembled with hatred. The giant who had forced him to flee in panic had indeed come. Positron cannon. No, how does the pure yang extermination gun taste? Kanglin was silent. Of course, he would not care about his opponent's senseless provocation. But the positron cannon, or the pure yang extermination gun, was indeed an eye-opening killer move. He did not expect that in this despicable world, someone could actually use such a powerful immortal technique. Although it lacked many subtle and exquisite changes, the pure lethality of it still caused him to be horrified. This arrival was indeed not a good task. On the other side, Wang Lu's mood was not as relaxed as he appeared. Tetragon, who was beside him, was even more cautious. "Wang Lu, don't be careless. We don't have the upper hand." "I know." Taking advantage of the exhaustion of the long battle and hitting him by surprise, we can't cause any effective damage. In terms of strength, he is indeed one level stronger than us. How many more times can you use the positron cannon just now? With the void spirit root, theoretically I can use it indefinitely. But it takes a long time to charge up each time. I'm afraid he won't give me enough time. I can delay it for you, no need. You are not in good condition now, and your solo combat ability is less than 50% of your peak state. Instead of being wasted as cannon fodder, it's better to support me from inside the giant soldier god. Later, I will release the floating cannon to contain him. Your primordial spirit is far more accurate than mine, so I'll leave the microcontrol to you." "Floating cannon? Forget it, you don't have to explain it to me. This giant soldier god was given to you by Sun Booping. You can use it however you want, and I should be able to cooperate with this big guy." "Okay." Without saying much, Wang Lu directly activated the mechanism on the back of the giant soldier god. Instantly, thousands of tiny metal balls flew out. Each of them danced nimbly in the air, shooting beams of light at Kanglin Immortal from time to time. Some of these beams of light were full of blazing fire chi, some were cold, and some were simply sharp sword chi. They were all in different shapes and sizes, but they were all extremely lethal. The large metal balls were 3 meters in diameter, and the small ones were only the size of a fist. But in terms of pure destructive power, they were comparable to the attacks of nascent soul or even soul formation cultivators. These thousands of metal balls bombarded down like a storm, and ordinary perfected cultivators would be riddled with holes in an instant. Of course, Kanglin Immortal was not a mere perfected cultivator. In the storm, he unfolded his veil and stood still. But his expression was far from calm. These floating cannons could not break through the veil and hurt him, but they also made it difficult for him to attack the enemy. The storm-like energy output completely disrupted the surrounding spiritual energy, and also disrupted the laws of heaven and earth. It was difficult for his immortal method to work in this environment, unless he used the move of freezing hundreds of miles at any cost, but that was obviously not worth it. In fact, when he saw the floating cannons all over the sky, Kanglin already had the idea of retreating. This battle was too unfavorable for him. According to his immortal heart calculation, even if he could win this battle, he would at least be in a miserable state, with less than 10 or 20% of his strength left. Although he could kill the thief in front of him to vent his anger, it would also easily delay the important matter. Even though 9 regions was lowly, there was no shortage of strong individuals among the ants. They called themselves Dixian. Although the name was ridiculous, their numbers were also troublesome. If he met a few of the best among the Dixian when he was at his weakest, it would be really troublesome. Thinking of this, Kanglin immediately sprayed out a mouthful of extremely cold air, which froze the surrounding dozens of miles. The floating cannons instantly stopped and could no longer move. Kanglin took this opportunity to launch another immortal method, ready to leave this extremely cold place. However, just as the immortal method was about to take effect, a golden spherical light cover suddenly enveloped him. The next moment, the immortal method was violently disturbed and immediately failed. The power of the immortal spirit backfire made Kanglin feel pain in his chest. "Who? Huh. Just now, you were so fierce with me, but you forgot me so quickly. It's really sad." Chapter 769. Haunting Lunatic, do you really think I can't kill you? Within the Golden Sword defense, Kanglin Immortal's anger boiled, and the immortal spirit around him surged endlessly like a torrential tide. The pair of divine eyes of the immortal burst out with blazing red light and infinite divine power, which twisted and stretched the perfectly round sword defense, as if it could break at any time. The sword defense was not broken, but it was already very difficult to support it. Even though it was isolated by the non-phase sword defense, the extremely cold land still trembled because of this incredible surging power. The power of the immortal did not belong to this world, nor would it be bound by the method of this world. Non-phase sword defense was already a top powerful method in 9 regions, but obviously in the eyes of the fallen immortal it was still not enough. However, one non-phase method was not enough. 2 non-phase methods plus a giant divine weapon made Kenglin immortal unable to ignore them. He roared in the sword defense, but his immortal heart was as cold as the hundreds of miles-long corridor. The situation was really unfavorable to him. A giant divine weapon that could use the pure Yang extinction spear was already quite a threat. Coupled with the haunting Wang Wu in his current state, it was no longer a matter of how much it would cost, but a problem that could not be solved even if he spent more than a price. Through the passage between the 2 worlds, he had to spend more than 80% of his immortal spirit to descend into this world. His less than half a day time was far from enough for him to recover to his fighting state. Using more than 20% of his strength to fight against these reckless people was not his good fighting style. But he had no choice now. Scoundrel, show yourself. The light of the immortal's divine eyes was even brighter, and in an instant, it was as if a new sun was ignited. The narrow space in the golden sword defense was filled with light, and Wang Wu, who was hiding in the shadow, could not hide and was illuminated. However, she was not in a hurry, because before Kenglin had time to make a move against her, the light of divine punishment from the sky had already descended. The light of the positron cannon was not inferior to the celestial divine eyes. Wang Wu's golden sword defense left a small hole for the positron cannon to descend. Kenglin immortal immediately dropped Wang Wu and raised his veil. The power of the positron cannon was too strong. If it really landed on his body, there was a risk of serious injury or even death. He still had important things to do. How could he die here? With the light gauze around, Wang Lu's positron cannon couldn't do anything to him. However, in order to block the positron cannon, the light gauze had gathered too much power in one spot. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Wang Wu unceremoniously rushed forward and punched Kenglin with her bare fists while laughing wildly. When the punch was launched, it caused a rumble of thunder. It was the sound of the air within the sword defense being compressed violently. When Wang Wu punched out, the invisible air was compressed by the huge force into a tangible wall of air that was harder than steel. The force was transmitted to Kenglin's back from more than 100 feet away, creating a dazzling golden light. An immortal's entire body was a treasure. The light gauze was a treasure, and the long gown was also a treasure. An ordinary long gown, but when it was attacked, it burst forth with amazing defensive power. Wang Wu's punch had the power to split mountains and rocks, but it could only slightly flatten the folds of the long gown. The next moment, Kenglin immortal, who had dealt with the positron cannon, turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blazing fire. Wang Wu's golden sword defense was shattered in an instant. It wasn't broken by an external force, but Wang Wu had taken the initiative to release the sword defense. This was because she wanted to escape. Kenglin's true samadhi fire was too strong. If she still insisted on holding the sword defense, either the sword defense would be melted by the true fire and she would suffer from the backlash, or the fire would roll in the sword defense and she would be burned to ashes. Therefore, at this moment, Wang Wu could only withdraw the sword defense first. Once the sword defense was withdrawn, theoretically, Kenglin would have a chance to escape. However, instead of retreating, he moved forward. His divine sense locked onto Wang Wu, and a mouthful of samadhi fire chased after her endlessly. In an instant, a sea of fire was sprinkled down. This sea of fire was directed at Wang Wu. It burned in midair and did not land on the ground. However, the residual heat made the ice and snow in the extremely cold land unbearable and began to melt. The glaciers flowed into streams, and the streams converged into rivers. The snowfield melted into lakes and oceans, but they soon evaporated, revealing the bare rock surface. Within a radius of 100 miles, the snowfield evaporated. This was the aftermath of the immortal's true fire. In the encirclement of the true fire, Wang Wu could not remain calm. A sword defense with a radius of less than 10 feet was propped up by her again. This sword defense was much smaller, but its strength was also much higher. Even when surrounded by the true fire, it did not show any sign of loosening. However, this time, in the immortal's divine eyes, she finally saw more things. 1, 2, 3 for 15 king pill? Kanglin Immortal finally sucked in a mouthful of cold air. Since his arrival in 9 regions in just over half a day, he had been surprised many times. However, none of them shook his heart like this. 15 king pill? What was this thing? Yes, it was something. Because no matter what reason was used to explain it, it could not explain how a human body could accommodate so many king pill. This was not a matter of quantity, but a matter of fundamental impossibility. A Yuanying stage cultivator might be 10 times or even 100 times stronger than a king pill cultivator, but it was impossible to stuff 100 king pills into one's body. Moreover, each of them was functioning normally, and they were connected to each other. No matter how strong a man was, he could not grow 10 arms. Those who could grow 10 arms were only monsters. And Wang Wu was such a monster. Kanglin originally thought that she was using the same king pill repeatedly, but now he saw that there was more than one king pill in her body. No wonder she had so many personalities. However, this was even more contrary to common sense and even more terrifying. The fear in Kanglin Immortal's heart began to emerge again. This time it was not the fear of failing the task, which would delay the great plan, nor the fear of being hurt by these scoundrels, but it was an instinctive fear of the unknown. After not returning to this land for tens of thousands of years, could it already breed monsters? Thus, the color of the true Samadhi fire suddenly changed. Kanglin began to disregard his origin and really put his life on the line. Even if someone would take the opportunity to hurt him, even if the loss of forcibly descending would be difficult to recover, even if it would delay the great plan of the upper realm, he did not care. This person must be eliminated first. The full outbreak of the fallen immortal, even if it was only when they were tired, was not a trivial matter. Even if Wang Wu had 15 king pills, she still could not block it. But naturally someone could help her block it. Absolute field domain. A golden polygonal shield appeared in front of Wang Wu. The sea of fire stopped in front of the shield, and even the fire could not shine on Wang Wu, because in front of Wang Wu, there was a mountain-like figure, which cast a shadow that covered the sky. Wang Lu drove the giant divine weapon and finally came to the scene in person. By combining the non-phase method with the defensive immortal method of the giant divine weapon, Wang Lu subconsciously comprehended this unique defensive technique. Wang Wu's non-phase sword defense at this time might not be able to block the true Samadhi fire, but Wang Lu's absolute field domain easily blocked it. At the same time, a storm rained down on top of Kanglin's head. Under the control of Tetragon, thousands of floating cannons began to crazily output firepower. These floating cannons were like tickles to Kanglin, who was going all out. They couldn't hurt him, but they could make him look embarrassed. At this time, Kanglin even began to disregard his own life, so he naturally didn't care about being embarrassed or not. He took a step forward and took a deep breath. Thus, all the true Samadhi fire was sucked into his abdomen. The hot extreme north began to show a bit of coolness. The next moment, Kanglin opened his mouth and spat out an orange-red fireball. Wang Lu's complexion changed and he said, F***ck, the immortal skill was really amazing. The true Samadhi fire, which could melt the snowfield with its residual heat, was already strong enough, but the immortal's inhalation and exhalation had increased its power several times. This orange-red fireball not only condensed and compressed the sea of fire, but also produced a new change in the process of compression. This was a real small sun. It couldn't be blocked by force because the absolute field domain was not really absolute. It couldn't escape because the sun could emit light, and light was infinitely fast. Similarly, it couldn't counterattack because unless it could reverse the rate of cause and effect, it was impossible to arrive earlier than the light. And the reason why Wang Lu could still have the leisure to think at that moment was that the sun had not really exploded. If it really exploded, it would be an unsolvable situation. But he knew that this sun would not explode, so he just said F***ck. But he didn't panic. This was because he saw what he wanted to see in this sun. The next moment, Kanglin let out a sneer, operated his primordial spirit, and detonated the sun. It was hard to describe the light and heat that burst out in an instant. The time in the entire northernmost land seemed to stop for a moment, and then it began to continue to flow. After skipping that crucial time, One could see that in the sky above the northernmost land, the fire poured down like a waterfall, and the fire flowed on the ground like a river. Endless light and heat radiated in all directions with this as the center. The northernmost land had a radius of tens of millions of miles, and no one could completely change this piece of land with their own strength. However, seeing the magnificent scene of hundreds of miles melting in the center of the land, people felt that it was only a matter of time before the entire northernmost land was burned. The power of the fallen immortals was so terrifying, but at this time Kanglin's complexion was very bad, because although he melted hundreds of miles of ice and snow, he didn't melt the opponent in front of him. The golden polygon, which was hundreds of feet long and wide, was still standing, and the giant divine weapon and the outer path evildoer behind the shield were still alive and kicking. Why? The explosion just now should have broken the shield and incinerated the two people behind it. Even if he was very weak at this time and still had injuries on his body, he would never miscalculate the lethality of the immortal method. The people who should have died did not die. Kanglin was naturally puzzled, but soon he saw a trace of abnormality. The immortal divine eyes looked around, and he clearly saw that the ground under his feet, after the snow cover melted, revealed the scorched surface, and the surface seemed to be shining with a layer of soft light that did not belong to this place. The immortal's divine sense instantly calculated the cause and effect, and the result came out in an instant. That giant god had once chased after him when he had just arrived. At that time Kanglin hit himself, and the giant divine weapon couldn't find him, so it had no choice but to leave. At that time, he quietly put poison in the northernmost land. When Kanglin absorbed the providence of the northernmost land and integrated it into his body, the poison also lurked in his body. When he didn't use it, everything was normal, but when he encountered an emergency and didn't hesitate to use all his strength, the poison would completely break out. First, it disintegrated Kanglin's true samadhi fire. Secondly, there were signs of instability in Kanglin's body. Being able to damage an immortal, this was indeed a strange poison. It was a strange poison called holy light. Chapter 770. Sure enough, you're a shameless person. Kanglin Immortal's voice was no longer as furious as before. Instead, it became calm. At this point, anger could no longer solve the problem, so he had no intention to continue to be angry. Even if he had enough reason to be angry, because even Tetragon was in a state of shock and anger at this time. Wang Lu, how dare you? Do you know that you? Of course I know. Wang Lu interrupted him unceremoniously. In today's 9 regions, who could have a deeper understanding of holy light than Wang Lu? As the master of holy light, how could he not understand the consequences of burying holy light in the providence of 9 regions as a poison? The introduction of the seed of power of a foreign continent into the providence of 9 regions would cause a fundamental change in the nature of the land. This behavior was generally called colonization. Dividing the territory was one of the biggest damages to 9 regions. The land of extreme cold was an ownerless land, so it was very easy for it to be divided. However, for tens of thousands of years no one had ever dared to do so. But so what? Gem, are you out of your mind? Can't you tell the difference? When the fallen immortal came, the entire 9 regions would be fragmented. Compared with that, what was a colony? Of course, Tetragon understood this truth, but it didn't mean that she could accept it easily. Gem, figure it out. Holy light is my holy light. Where I am, holy light is there, and this separated land belongs to that place. With that, Wang Lu no longer paid attention to Tetragon, but focused all his attention on Kanglin. The opponent was the fallen immortal, so he could not be afraid of him, but he could not ignore him. The poison of holy light could disintegrate his fireball, but it could not disintegrate his existence. Now the poison of holy light had indeed spread to his body, but with Kanglin's strength, it was easy for him to dispel the holy light. The poison tactic gave him some advantages, but overall it was still a stalemate. The fallen immortals had a very deep foundation, so it was impossible for them to be suppressed so easily. If Kanglin had risked his life, he would have been able to shoot 10 of those sun-like fireballs, but Wang Lu did not have the ability to shoot 9 suns in a row. However, being able to fight fiercely with him until now meant that they had achieved their strategic goal. Wang Lu smiled and manipulated the giant god to make humming sounds. Senior, Your mystical techniques are truly admirable. If we were to fight one-on-one, none of us would be able to last more than 3 moves from you. Therefore, we can only fight you by outnumbering you. I hope you won't mind. So what if there are so many of you rats? Kanglin sneered, and all the holy light in his body had been squeezed out by him. At the same time, 3 orange-red fireballs appeared around him. The color was subtly different from the previous one, and their power was slightly inferior, but they would not be disturbed by the holy light and collapse midway. This power was more than enough to defeat the giant god weapon and the heretic cultivator. So what if there are more? This is what Senior said, then I can rest assured. Wang Lu said and then paused. I can rest assured that I can win by outnumbering you. As soon as his voice fell, the sky suddenly darkened, and a dark cloud covered the clear sky, shrouding everything in shadow. Hichu Daoran of the 9 regions Wanxian League greets Kanglin Immortal. Above the dark cloud, Hichu Doran's voice was like a great bell. He looked down at the senior immortal from the upper realm. He stepped on the 9 regions map, and the veins of the earth and the lines on the map intertwined with each other. The light was like a fence, which completely blocked the battlefield. Beside Hichu, one after another, characters who were enough to shake 9 regions stood up. Military Emperor Kuchin greets Senior Immortal. A golden full-body heavy armor and a blood-colored flag. The leader of the strongest army in 9 regions stood beside Hichu while holding the flag. As the flag danced, there were thousands of shouts in the distance. That was the invincible army of Royal Soldier Sect. At this time, although he could not rush to the battlefield, he could become a strong backing for Kuchin. He seemed to be one person, but in fact he was a magnificent army. Kunlun Sect's jury greets Senior Immortal. The simple and upright Taoist with a rigid face stood on the other side of Hichu Daoran. His posture and expression were meticulous. As he slightly raised his chin, the 9 regions map slightly twisted the angle, locking the battlefield more firmly. If Hichu Daoran and his Shangjing sect symbolize the king's path in the immortal cultivation world of 9 regions, then Supreme Jury regarded himself as the righteous path. 10,000 Laws Tianluan greets Senior Immortal. The handsome Supreme Tianluan chuckled and stood beside Jury. From time to time, he rotated a slender ring on his right index finger. However, as the ring rotated, the mountains and rivers on the 9 regions map quietly changed, constructing a new law of heaven and earth. Spirit Sword Feng Yin greets Senior Immortal. Feng Yin Taoist Master was the last one to take a step. Among the 5 sect leaders, he was the least qualified and had the lowest cultivation base. However, he impressively stood in front of the 4 people, as if he was the moon surrounded by the stars. At this time, Feng Yin showed an unprecedented solemnity. The Kunlun mirror on the bridge of his nose was wiped clean. Behind the mirror, the starry eyes that could see through the cause and effect were restrained. Behind him was a large sword case, which was full of light like the stars in the night sky. As he stepped on the 9 regions map, this immortal treasure that controlled the 9 regions suddenly came to life as if it had the finishing touch. The light grating that ran through the sky and the earth disappeared, but it merely became invisible. Instead, the force that bound the battlefield increased exponentially. Feng Yin's step completely activated the array, activating all the magical abilities and the great Tao contained in the 9 regions map. Senior, you just said that you don't mind fighting with many, so I can call a few reinforcements here, right? As Wang Lu said, he put away the absolute domain and lifted the weapon in his right hand. It was a slender cannon that stretched for several miles, and the muzzle was aimed at Kanglin. Kanglin Immortal was silent for a moment, and then suddenly laughed. Hee ha 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 ha. Fighting with many? What a joke. Trash like you, I'll kill as many as you come. While speaking, the 3 small suns rushed into the sky at the same time and hit the 9 regions map. The protective veil suddenly expanded and swept toward Wang Lu. Then, he disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The tribulation thunder that fell from the 9 regions map accurately hit the 3 fireballs and detonated them in midair. However, the destructive attribute of the tribulation thunder completely wiped out the remaining power of the explosion, which made the Immortal's killer move completely fail. The giant divine weapon driven by Wang Lu seemed to be cumbersome, but it burst out with amazing agility. In an instant it flashed thousands of times within a radius of 100 miles, which made the immortal treasure veil unable to catch it, and no matter how many magical abilities it had, it couldn't be used. The next moment, a strong light suddenly broke out over the snowfield thousands of miles away. Thousands of crisscrossing light gratings suddenly appeared in the air, flickering and slightly deformed under the impact of an invisible force. It was the light grating of the 9 regions map that locked the battlefield. Above the sky, Hichu shook his body slightly and let out a muffled groan. Supreme Kuchin took a step forward, and the battle flag heavily landed on the ground. The flag fluttered, summoning the projection of hundreds of millions of magical weapons to kill the distance. Supreme Jury pressed his hands down, which was not easy to maintain the integrity of the 9 regions map. Supreme Tianluan frowned, pinched the ring on his right index finger, and slowly rotated it. The light grating thousands of miles away gradually stabilized with the rotation of the ring. Finally, Fengyin Taoist master closed his right eye and saw things with his left eye. He suddenly turned around and swung his stellar sword horizontally toward Hichu Daoren. This sword was extremely fast. Before anyone could react in time, it was less than 3 feet away from Hichu Daoren. At this distance, even if the 4 Supremes surrounded him, no one could stop Feng Yin's sword. However, the immortal sword stopped 3 feet away. Bastard! Kanglin Immortal glared angrily and showed his figure from the void. He was between the tip of Feng Yin's sword and Hichu Daoren. His 2 palms were forced to close together, sandwiching the immortal sword in Feng Yin's hand. It turned out that the Samadhi True Fire was fake, the light gauze cage was fake, and the surprise attack thousands of miles away was also fake. The real purpose of Kanglin Immortal was to counterattack and directly attack the root of the problem. This move was extremely fast, but it was seen through by Fengyin Taoist master at the critical moment. His sword crossed the sky and cut out an impossible gap, blocking Kanglin Immortal's sneak attack. However, the power of a single person was still lacking. Kanglin Immortal clamped the immortal sword with both hands. One hand turned into yang, condensing the high temperature that could burn mountains and boil seas, and the other hand turned into yin, condensing the cold that could freeze time and space. In an instant, the cold and hot intertwined, causing the immortal sword to break in pain. Get out of here! With a roar, Kanglin held the broken immortal sword with both hands and thrust it forward. Feng Yin was suddenly unable to hold on, and was hit in the chest by the hilt of the sword. He flew backward for more than 100 miles, and his blood spilled into the sky. The next moment, Kanglin Immortal's yin and yang hands slapped toward Hichu Daoren. There was no longer any obstacle between the two. At the critical moment, Hichu Daoren's toes touched the 9 regions map. In an instant, the 9 regions map was magnified thousands of times. The several people who gathered together were suddenly separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, completely separated from each other. As for Senior Immortal Kanglin's palm, it also fell into the air. Ha! Kanglin's move failed, but he revealed a smile of success. With a whistling sound, he flew straight up like a sharp arrow, leaving only a small figure in an instant. Not good. He's going to run away. The 5 sect leaders came with the 9 regions map. The 9 regions map was high above the clouds, sealing off the world. However, there was actually an endless sky above the clouds. That was a field that no cultivator could seal off. And there was a whistling astral wind in the 9th sky. The higher the altitude, the more violent the astral wind. So far, no cultivator had been able to explore the strength of the sky. But there was no doubt that as the strongest individual fallen immortal, Kanglin could fly higher than anyone present. At that time, relying on the astral wind in the 9th sky, he could open an insurmountable distance from the others, and the encirclement against him would be meaningless. Unfortunately, although everyone present could realize this problem, they were powerless to stop it. Kanglin Immortal's speed was too fast, faster than anyone present. Once he started, he would not fall behind anyone, unless someone could start earlier than him. Just when Kanglin was about to break through the sky, he suddenly saw a white figure above his head. That person held up a mountain with one hand. That was Wang Wu. When did she get here? An incredible emotion suddenly welled up in Kanglin's heart. However, before he could think clearly, Wang Wu smashed down the mountain that she was holding. The strength of this landslide was far beyond Kanglin's imagination. At the moment when the boulder hit his face, Kanglin felt that his primordial spirit seemed to be about to leave his body. In a trance, he seemed to see more King Pill in Wang Wu's body. The next moment, he completely lost control of his body and smashed straight to the ground like a meteorite. Boom! In the loud noise, a towering mountain was smashed by him at the waist, and the upper half of the mountain collapsed, revealing a hollow mountainside. Kanglin lay in the rubble of the mountainside and struggled to get up. However, the immortal spirit around his body flowed in reverse, completely not listening to him. He tried several times in succession, but he could not muster up any strength at all. How could that lowly creature from the lower realm cause such serious damage to him? Kanglin found it hard to believe, but in the next moment, he found that there seemed to be an invisible force around him that was constantly absorbing his immortal spirit, making him increasingly weak. Who is it? It's me. In front of Kanglin, a pure black human silhouette appeared. It's you, lowly dog. It's me, but compared to me, you should be more concerned about where this place is, Black said calmly. Then, without waiting for Kanglin to speak, he gave his answer one step ahead. I don't know if you've heard of Hades Mountain, the immortal trap array. You? Please rest here quietly, we'll meet again in 10,000 years. In the next moment, the cracked mountain rocks suddenly began to gather together, completely burying the hollow belly of the mountain, leaving not the slightest gap. And Kanglin's world was completely plunged into darkness. Chapter 771. A towering mountain and an immortal trap array handed down from the Age of Desolation together, formed one of the famous dangerous places in 9 regions. Netherworld Mountain Immortal Trap Array. From ancient times to the present, no one knew how many capable people went deep into this place and then disappeared. The hinterland of Netherworld Mountain was like a ferocious behemoth, which swallowed up all the visitors, leaving no dregs behind. Of course, the more dangerous the place was, the more curious it would be. There would never be a lack of curious and adventurous individuals among the cultivators. The exploration of Netherworld Mountain had never stopped for tens of thousands of years. However, it was conceivable that after tens of thousands of years, no one had really explored the secret of the immortal trap array. Whether it was going deep into it or using immortal method to explore from the outside, in the end nothing was found. There was once a rough sect that tried to overthrow Netherworld Mountain by violence. As a result, the whole sect was removed from 9 regions overnight, as if it had been cursed. Today is really an eye-opener. I can't believe that even an immortal can be trapped in it. Amazing, really amazing. Outside Netherworld Mountain, Wang Lu piloted the giant divine weapon and floated in midair, marveling at the mountain that gradually recovered under his feet. An earth-shattering battle had finally come to an end here. The insufferably arrogant fallen immortal was silent. It was indeed a great Netherworld Mountain and a great immortal trap array. Previously, for the sake of Kanglin Immortal, it could be said that all the strongest people in the continent failed to stop him, and they were even almost penetrated by him. However, in the end, this unremarkable mountain could suppress him, because this Netherworld Mountain Immortal Trap Array perfectly restrains Kanglin. Black's voice passed into Wang Lu's ears. Kanglin is a practical person with rich experience in actual combat among the fallen immortals. Many years of battle have made him almost flawless. But in the end, no one is perfect. He still has a fatal weakness. He is an immortal. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu curiously asked, as an immortal, he has all kinds of privileges that the cultivators in the lower realm can't have. What kind of weakness is this? The immortals in the upper realm are indeed noble, but Netherworld Mountain is a prison set up by the upper realm in the 9 regions during the Great Desolate Age to imprison the exiled immortals. This prison was set up for immortals. Everything was designed to target immortals and use their divine abilities to suppress them. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they might have a chance to escape. But if an immortal enters, they can forget about coming out. Interesting. Wang Lu nodded. However, since even you know about the Abyssal Mountain's immortal trapping formation, and Kanglin is a practical fighter, can you guarantee that he doesn't know about it, and that he won't have any countermeasures? I'm not Kanglin himself, so I can't guarantee anything. But no matter what, this is already the best outcome. Best? I'm afraid not. After all, Kanglin didn't die in battle. He was just suppressed, and I can't be at ease if I can't see him being suppressed like a dead dog by the immortal trapping formation with my own eyes. Wang Lu said, his eyes locked on Black. Who knows what's going on with him inside? Perhaps he's suppressed to the point that he can't move, or perhaps you're colluding with him to put on a show. It looks like he's being suppressed, but in fact he's hiding in the cave in the mountain, which is warm in winter and cool in summer. When he fully recovers, he'll come out of Netherworld Mountain and slaughter all the dogs in 9 regions. Black shook his head and laughed. Ha ha ha, when did Taoist Master Wang Lu become so suspicious? Wang Lu's voice turned cold. Do I need to confide in a 3-surname slave like you? Do you think I'm Luli? With that, the muzzle of the positron cannon that stretched for several miles suddenly aimed at Black. Moreover, in this situation I can't trust you and I can't find your value. It's more cost-effective to turn you into experience points, don't you think? I don't think that's a wise choice. In the face of Wang Lu's positron cannon, Black said in a deep voice, a chess piece like me, no matter how much contribution I make, for the people in the upper realm, I'm still a bastard that's not even comparable to a dog. If the plan goes well, I can still eat a few bones. But my plan was disrupted by Luo Xiao halfway, and I made an irreparable mistake. Then I have no choice but to defect. Now I'm on the same boat as you. As for the value, I think no one in 9 regions knows the fallen immortal in the upper realm better than me. This unique piece of information is my value. While the two of them were talking, the 9 regions map in the clouds slowly descended, and the 5 sect leaders gathered one after another. Wang Lu temporarily put down Black and turned to salute the 5 people one by one. Just now, in the fierce battle with Kanglin Immortal, thanks to the timely arrival of these 5 supreme-level powerhouses, who symbolize the strongest fighting power in the immortal cultivation world of 9 regions, Kanglin was forced to flee like a cornered dog jumping over a wall. Finally, he revealed a flaw and was taken into the belly of the Netherworld Mountain. There was no prior plan for the whole process. It was the 5 people who sensed that there was a great battle in the extreme north that they rushed here. However, in such a hurry, they had a good tacit understanding with Wang Lu and his disciple in every step. This experience and strength were indeed worthy of respect. The 5 people also heard the dialogue between Wang Lu and Black. Wang Lu, I think he's right. Although this person has committed a crime that can't be redeemed even if he dies 10,000 times, it's undeniable that he does have value. Supreme Jury said, I think it's more beneficial for us to keep him alive. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu couldn't help but feel happy. Supreme Jury was a well-known idealistic bureaucrat in the immortal cultivation world. His nature was indeed not bad, and his strength was also strong enough, but his IQ was really not worthy of the title of the leader of the 5 uniques. Supreme Tianluan said, from an academic point of view, any deduction and calculation must be based on enough intelligence, and our biggest problem now is that we know almost nothing about the fallen immortal. If we can make good use of Black's intelligence, it will be of great benefit to the future battle. But on the other hand, if we get false intelligence, it will be counterproductive, which also needs to be paid attention to. Wang Lu shook his head slightly. Supreme Tianluan said so much, but it was tantamount to saying nothing. The key now was whether Black was trustworthy or not, but Supreme Tianluan was unwilling to make a judgment. Supreme Jury added, in the battle just now, if he didn't launch the immortal trap array in the Netherworld Mountain at the last moment, it would be difficult for us to really suppress the immortals in the upper realm. In this regard, he can be regarded as redeeming his crime with meritorious service. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu sneered and said, Supreme Jury, are you old and confused? How can you be sure that Kanglin was suppressed? Have you gone in and seen it? Supreme Jury was not angry, but turned his head and said, Kuchin, what do you say? I'm not interested in your intrigue. With that, Supreme Kuchin unfolded the battle flag. The flag, as if alive, wrapped Kuchin up, rolled up, and then disappeared without a trace. Kuchin chose to leave early without any sense of responsibility. Jury shook his head helplessly and asked Feng Yin, fellow Taoist must be on the side of Wang Lu? Feng Yin did not hide it and said, yes, I support all of Wang Lu's decisions. Jury then turned to Hichu Daoren and asked, we have already expressed our views. Now it's your turn to make a decision. As soon as Taoist Master Hichu was about to speak, Someone suddenly interrupted. I haven't said my point of view yet. Everyone turned their eyes and saw a bald man walking out slowly from the dark shadow. It was Luo Xiao. Seeing Luo Xiao, the expressions of the several supremes were a bit strange. Wang Lu directly moved the muzzle of the cannon, and the light of the positronic convergence shone in the muzzle. This traitor of 9 regions committed the crime of murdering his master for his own selfishness and caused the fall of Shizhou, which could be said to be an unforgivable crime. However, on the other hand, he also made a great contribution by instigating black and cooperating with others to suppress the fallen immortals. If the merits and demerits were compared, the merits seemed to be more. However, with the precedent of betrayal, Luo Xiao was also not trustworthy. I know that you probably don't have much trust in me, but there's one thing I think you need to know. Not long ago when I instigated Black to rebel, he refused to obey. At that time, his plan to strangle Sun Buping failed. In the eyes of the fallen immortals, he was already a dereliction of duty dog. And the fallen immortals have always done things with merit and demerits. So, if he continued to stick to the fallen immortal camp, he would simply bring about his own destruction, so he might as well jump to our side. But at that time he didn't agree but said. Before Luo Xiao could finish his words, a dazzling light suddenly burst out in front of him. Wang Lu's positron cannon mercilessly aimed and fired, shooting out a ray of light as thick as an arm. It brushed past Luo Xiao's cheek and burned his eyebrows. However, at the same time it also blocked a group of shadows that rushed over. Black, what are you in such a hurry for? He hasn't finished his words. What do you want to do by rushing over? Do you want to kill him? Upon hearing this, Luo Xiao didn't even look at Black and said with a smile, of course, he's in a hurry to kill him. If it weren't for me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to separate myself from his shadow. Not long ago when he violently hurt people, I wondered why he did it. Later, after thinking hard in the dark, I finally came up with the answer. He once said that his defection to the fallen immortal side was not for his own selfishness, and then he gave some other messy reasons. But in the end he still defected, so I didn't think much about it at that time. But later, the more I thought about it, the more I felt it was subtle. If joining the fallen immortal side was not for his own selfishness, what else could it be? Organization interests? Or some lofty ideal? I remember very clearly that at that time, he called the fallen immortal master, and there's no need to mention how intimate and respectful he was. Such a person. Would he really betray the Wanxian League side? To be honest, I don't believe it. Upon hearing this, Black sighed and said, It seems that you never trusted me from the beginning. Ha ha ha, trust a 3-surname slave like you? Do you think I'm an idiot? Of course I've never trusted you. It's just that I can't find any clues about you and can't guess your intention. It wasn't until you suddenly plotted against me not long ago, and just now you tried to kill me, that I completely understood everything. Luo Xiao said, looked up at Wang Lu, and said with a smile, in short, it's a trick of injuring oneself to gain confidence. Wang Lu also smiled and said, yes, it's a trick of injuring oneself to gain confidence. As soon as his voice fell, the firepower of the positron cannon burst out in full force, and a thick beam of light directly penetrated the netherworld mountain. Chapter 772. When he saw Wang Lu slightly turn the muzzle of the cannon, Black's mind was in a trance, and fragments of the past always emerged in his mind. Then he suddenly remembered a sentence. Life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you will get. This sentence was first circulated in the port cities of the 9 regions. At that time, chocolate from the Western continent had just begun to become popular in 9 regions. The specious production method made the quality of chocolate very unstable. Similarly, a box of chocolate could have thousands of flavors. Therefore, some busybodies used this as a metaphor for life, which was actually quite appropriate. When Black was young, he had heard this sentence. At that time, he was still an ordinary cultivator in a port city. On a narrow island, he joined an immortal cultivation sect that relied on the sea for a living. A foundation establishment master led 7 or 8 qi cultivating stage disciples to fish and practice qi all day long. His days were plain, but there was no lack of fun. His master was a good person. Although he looked fierce, his temperament was actually the most gentle. He was originally a fisherman who lived by the sea. One day when he saw the sunrise on the sea, his heart was suddenly moved, and just like that, he stepped into the threshold of immortal cultivation. Then, while fishing, he also pondered some secrets of immortal cultivation. He had no master, no resources. Purely relying on his perception and a little interest, he spent 20 years to enter the foundation establishment stage and had some magical abilities. When the surrounding fishermen children saw him, they pestered him to learn, and he taught them everything he knew. For him, immortal cultivation was just a hobby. What he really loved was to sail a boat and cast a net on the sea to catch fish. That was indeed a dream era for immortal cultivators. A fisherman with mediocre aptitude could obtain immortal fate in his daily life and open the path of immortal cultivation. But now it was absolutely impossible. However, it was such an ordinary fisherman who changed Black's life and also changed the history of the immortal cultivation world. Black followed the fisherman to learn immortal cultivation for several years. His outstanding aptitude soon made him surpass his master. Many times he, the disciple, had to take care of the master. In this small sect, the master and the disciple laughed and joked with each other, and they didn't care about it. Many times Black would think, what would happen if that kind of life continued? Would he leave that island one day, bid farewell to his lovely master and fellow apprentices, and go alone to a bigger world, a wider heaven and earth? Black himself couldn't give an answer, because he really couldn't remember what happened more than 10,000 years ago. He only remembered that on that day, a huge storm suddenly arose on the surface of the sea. Huge waves that were hundreds of feet high rose on the usually calm surface of the sea. Dark clouds covered the sky, and there wasn't an inch of time left in the world. Lightning bolts flashed wildly between the clouds, illuminating the pitch-black sponge. The fisherman master, who had lived by the sea for decades, had never seen such a spectacle. His intuition as a cultivator told him that this was not a natural phenomenon. Only a cultivator could cause such a change in the sky and earth. And to stir up such a storm near the coast, it was clear that they didn't care about the life and death of the port city by the shore. To everyone here, this was an imminent disaster. He brought his disciples to hide in the pirate's cave and activated the island's protective formation, waiting for the storm to pass. Unfortunately, the fluctuations of the formation had exposed their existence. The two demons who were fighting fiercely on the sea soon found the island. One of them waved his demonic palm and flattened the island with one slap. When he raised his hand, the souls of the master and disciples on the island were between his fingers. Damn! I thought it was some kind of perfect tonic. I didn't expect the quality to be so poor. It's not even enough to fill the gap between my teeth. With a raise of his hand he killed an entire sect. The demon was extremely dissatisfied and spat out a few curses. Then he swallowed the souls in his palm. However, when he closed his bloody mouth, his arm trembled because of the attack of the opponent's magic, and a soul escaped. The fish that escaped the net was Black. Black couldn't remember what happened after that. He only knew that in the end, a righteous cultivator came to kill the demons and killed both demons. The river was clean and the sea was peaceful. However, the casualties that had been caused were irreversible. Black, who survived, was discovered by that cultivator. His soul was preserved, and later, he was given a body by chance, and everything was restored to its original state. After that, his path of cultivation entered a new stage. That righteous cultivator came from a famous sect, and had a huge amount of resources that the cultivators of the border port could not imagine. Black followed him all the way to cultivate, from the king pill to the nascent soul stage to the peak. In the hundreds of years that followed, his achievements were unimaginable. However, he never experienced the simple happiness on the island again. Whether it was the king pill or the nascent soul stage, the growth of strength was just to achieve a simple goal, to survive. Black could never forget the fear and panic when he and his master were trembling in fear in the cave of the island, waiting for the end of the tsunami. He also could not forget the despair when the island that he had been operating for many years was destroyed by a palm. He no longer wanted to be close to death. As long as he could stay away from death, he was willing to do anything. And in this world there was no better guarantee of survival than having strong strength. Doing good and accumulating virtue was just a joke. Hiding from the world was just deceiving oneself. The only way was to become stronger and stronger. It was just that the qualifications of a cultivator were limited. Not everyone could become stronger without limit. So what should he do? Of course it was to follow the strong. As long as they were strong, they were worth following. No matter good or evil, there was no right or wrong. On that day on the island, the kind-hearted fishermen and cultivators were no match for the vicious devil, so they were completely annihilated. And the devil was no match for the righteous cultivators, so he was also beheaded. The law of the jungle was the truth of the immortal cultivation world, and it had nothing to do with good or evil. In addition, one must learn to occupy the righteousness, because righteousness was also a kind of strength. Those righteous cultivators often did things with righteousness, but did they really want to do things in a dignified manner? For hundreds of years, Black had seen many so-called righteous cultivators who did despicable things in the name of righteousness. Their way of doing things was even more heinous than those evil cultivators and devils, but because of righteousness, they were always successful. In 9 regions, the evil path had never been able to overwhelm the righteous path. In the final analysis, it was because of the lack of righteousness. Therefore, even if they did despicable things, they must do it in the name of righteousness. Black never thought that his idea was wrong. Therefore, when the brilliant Sun Booping began to form a gang, he actively joined it. When Sun Booping revealed the truth and told everyone that the future enemy would be the fallen immortals, Black did not hesitate to abandon his original companions. A good bird chooses a tree to nest in, and the strong side was righteous. Since the fallen immortals were stronger than anyone else in 9 regions, then of course they were more righteous than anyone else. Following the fallen immortals was far more righteous than being part of the resistance army. There was no doubt that following the fallen immortals was the right thing to do. This belief supported Black for more than 10,000 years, until an ant named Luo Xiao destroyed it all. After making an unforgivable mistake, Black could be sure that his master, who had followed him all his life, would inevitably abandon him. Thus, the so-called righteousness of the fallen immortals that he had been following for more than 10,000 years was shattered. What fallen immortals? What descending from the upper realm? Go to hell. As long as he could survive, he could do whatever it took. So what if he betrayed again? Perhaps in the future, the fallen immortals would eventually come to 9 regions and turn everything into ashes, but as long as he could live for a quarter of an hour, it was worth it. The only problem was Luo Xiao, who had never trusted him and held the power of his life and death. If this kind of person was not eliminated, his betrayal would be meaningless. He was still in a precarious situation, and his life was hanging by a thread. The other party was likely to kick him out after he lost his value, just like the fallen immortals. Therefore, he must find a way to kill Luo Xiao. That Baldy was cunning and cautious, so the general method would not work. Setting a trap in Netherworld Mountain was the best opportunity. Only he was familiar with the operation of the law there, so he could take advantage of the terrain to eradicate Kanglin and Luo Xiao at once. He was the only one who could claim the huge credit. In this way, the previous killing in the Wanxian League could also be alleviated. Unfortunately, although his design was good, it fell short of success. Luo Xiao was really a powerful character. In the Netherworld Mountain Immortal Trap Array, he took advantage of the terrain to make a desperate fight, but he failed to really suppress him. Later, when Luo Xiao caught his breath, the series of performances did not leave any room for Black to fight back. Thus, the hero became a spy, and the road to life became a road to death. How ironic! When he thought about it carefully, this was really his own fault. He betrayed everyone, so he was betrayed by everyone. Wasn't this the most appropriate ending? It was just that he was really not reconciled. He didn't want to die, and he didn't want it to end like this. There were still too many things to do, so how could he stop here? Facing the muzzle of Wang Lu's cannon, Black's body trembled slightly, and he opened his mouth to say the last sentence. However, at this moment, the muzzle suddenly moved away, revealing the bright smile on the face of the giant divine weapon. Ha ha ha, congratulations, you have successfully passed our final round of interview with this rich face. You don't understand? In fact, the reason is very simple. For a 3-surnamed slave like you to seek refuge, we must be very careful. Although many of what Luo Xiao said just now were false accusations, as a hypothesis, We can't find any reason to refute it. Perhaps you are really playing the trick of injuring yourself to gain confidence, or perhaps in Netherworld Mountain, Kanglin is really taking the opportunity to recuperate. We can't make a conclusive judgment, so we have to make the situation a little more complicated. At this time, Black also gradually regained his ability to think. So, you cooperated with Luo Xiao to put on a show to test my reaction. And the results are still satisfactory. Not to mention I had already blasted through the Netherworld Mountain with one shot, but you didn't even look at it. If you are said to be a warrior who adheres to lofty ideals, this performance is really a little unreasonable. Luo Xiao also sneered. Until the last moment he is thinking about his own life and death. Such a person in a sense is more reliable. As long as we control his life and death we can ensure his loyalty. Black was silent for a long time. So I have passed? Yes, you have passed. Welcome to the warm family of the Wanxian League. However, of course, in view of your previous performance, we can't give you the treatment of a formal member. Luo Xiao stretched out his hand. Originally, he has been my dog. I suggest that we let him start from a dog. I will shoulder the responsibility of the owner, how about it? Except for you, I'm afraid no one is interested in raising this dog. After Wang Lu finished speaking, he looked around again. Hey, what's with the expressions of the few Supremes? After listening to us for so long, you still haven't figured out what happened? This comprehension seems to be a bit too low. The few Supremes looked at each other. After a while, Zhuri sighed. Kachin, that guy left early. It was a wise choice. Sorry for updating so late. Chapter 773. Time always flew by unconsciously. On the stellar peak on a whim, Feng Yin put down the writing brush in his hand and looked at the night sky with deep eyes. The stars were shining, and the light was panoramic. The soul-stirring battle with the immortal from the upper realm 10 years ago seemed to have happened yesterday. Every detail had been deeply engraved in his mind, and from time to time ripples appeared in his mind, which made people feel a faint chill. In the battle with Kanglin Immortal, Feng Yin and the other Supremes only joined the battle halfway after receiving the warning. The process of the battle was not long, and there were only a few rounds in total. He too led the other 4 people to set up a cage with the 9 regions map, and then Kanglin broke through it. Then he forced the opponent to the sky, and Wang Wu, who was waiting in the sky, smashed him down with a mountain into the Netherworld Mountain. In just a few rounds everyone walked a few laps between life and death. At that time, if Feng Yin failed to detect the opponent's surprise attack in time and preemptively attacked with the Stellar Sword, perhaps Hichu Daoren would have been defeated by the Yin and Yang hands, and the entire 9 regions map would have fallen apart. If he hadn't left some true yuan to protect his body when he collided with the Yin and Yang hands, perhaps he wouldn't have been able to stop Kanglin's struggle. If Wang Wu didn't wait at a high place in advance and blocked Kanglin's way, then no one could control Kanglin after he rushed into the astral wind layer. It was really dangerous. It could be said that 9 regions would have slipped into the abyss. However, in the end it was over. 10 years had passed. 10 years had passed since that battle. During this period a lot of things had happened. For example, Mom, hurry up, or we can't catch up with the magic shuttle. There was a secluded town at the foot of Navy Blue Mountain. In the middle of an elegant courtyard, a little girl in a beautiful felt hat anxiously waved her arm to urge her mother. A moment later, a young woman walked out of the courtyard, carrying a small leather bag. She held the little girl's hand and unfolded a light muslin from the bag. Then she carried the 2 of them and flew towards a tall tower outside the town. There was a spacious platform at the top of the tower, and many people had already gathered there. The mother and daughter found a place where there were fewer people and waited. The little girl was very lively. Not long after, she couldn't bear the loneliness and wanted to run around, but was stopped by her mother. Fortunately, not long after, a flying shuttle flew over like lightning from the horizon. After stopping at the edge of the platform, the side hatch opened, revealing a spacious interior. A middle-aged cultivator came out and said in a clear voice, "We have arrived at Kankingshan Station. Please hurry up and board the shuttle." The people who had been waiting on the platform for a long time began to board the flying shuttle one after another. From the outside, the flying shuttle looked to be over 300 feet long, and the widest part was only 4 or 5 feet wide. However, the interior was actually a spacious space of hundreds of square meters, which could accommodate thousands of people. After the passengers of Mount Zangyama came up, the shuttle didn't seem crowded. It didn't take long for the shuttle to start slowly, and before long it climbed to the highest speed, really like lightning. The little girl was lying at the transparent window on the side of the shuttle, looking at the rapidly retreating scene outside the window with great interest, as if she was intoxicated. Most of the passengers who boarded the shuttle at Kankingshan Station were cultivators from the navy blue sect. Their cultivation base was between Qi cultivating stage and foundation establishment stage. With such cultivation base, they naturally couldn't talk about flying sword. However, the speed of this magic shuttle was comparable to the flying sword of a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, which was already an unimaginable speed for them. However, the size of 9 regions was enough to make most of the so-called high speed meaningless. After flying for more than an hour on the magic shuttle, they didn't even get out of the cloud region where Kankingshan was located. After all, the little girl didn't grow up, so she soon felt bored. She pouted and asked by the window, "Mom, when will we arrive at Netherworld Mountain?" "Don't worry, we'll be there soon." "How soon is soon?" The little girl was somewhat dissatisfied with her mother's perfunctory answer. She shook her mother's hand to make it clear. When her mother smiled bitterly, the middle-aged flight attendant who passed by replied with a smile, "There are still 2 hours, little sister, don't worry." "Well, okay." The little girl obviously showed a bitter face. Look at you, you can't wait for a moment?" "How about this, there is a model of the giant divine weapon on this magic shuttle, I'll get it for you to play." Okay. Her mother suddenly felt a little embarrassed. "Excuse me, how much is it to rent the model of the giant divine weapon?" "It's free, this is a special discount of this shuttle." The stewardess smiled generously, and then took out a foot-long humanoid toy model from the workshop. It was glittering with a metallic luster. He handed it to the little girl. This kind of model was usually only liked by boys. However, when the little girl saw the model, her eyes lit up, and even her saliva almost flowed out. She was so charmingly naive that the surrounding passengers couldn't help but laugh. The model was made by imitating the famous giant divine weapon. Every joint of the body could be moved and extended. If the user had cultivation base and poured magical power into the model, there could be more complex changes. It belonged to the professional version, so the price was very high. Unfortunately, the little girl had not yet begun to cultivate, so she couldn't use those complex functions. The game time always passed quickly. After a while, the magic shuttle stopped in front of a mountain. The flight attendant's voice echoed in the shuttle, "Passengers, we have arrived at the Netherworld Mountain Station. Please take your belongings and prepare to get off the shuttle." The little girl reluctantly returned the giant divine weapon model, but soon her attention was attracted by the scenery outside the shuttle. She hopped and dragged her mother forward. Outside the shuttle was also a platform of a tower. It was just that it was much larger than the tower at the foot of Navy Blue Mountain. Moreover, the platform was divided into multiple floors, and there were many shuttles parked at the edge of each floor. The shuttles were of different sizes, and the large ones were about 300 meters long, which looked magnificent. After the passengers on the shuttle got off, they quickly gathered together. On the platform, there were already cultivators in eye-catching clothes floating in the air in advance. Flying was prohibited on the platform, so it was very eye-catching. Those cultivators' cultivation base was not particularly high, but they all had quite good affinity, which made people have a good impression at first glance. "Good afternoon, tourists. Welcome to the Netherworld Mountain Hall of Resistance against the Fallen Immortal. I am He Yuanshan, the tour guide here. You can call me Little He." As Little He spoke, he flew to the depths of the Netherworld Mountain. The Netherworld Mountain was originally a barren mountain known as a forbidden area, but in recent years, it has been fully developed. A high platform was built outside the mountain where the shuttle could be docked, and the inside of the mountain was hollowed out and built into a world-famous memorial hall, which attracted thousands of people to visit every year. We all know that there is a very powerful enemy in 9 regions today called the Fallen Immortal. This word has been very popular in recent years, but in fact, as early as tens of thousands of years ago, some people realized the existence of the Fallen Immortal and began a long journey of struggle. First of all, let us come to the Great Desolation Hall to learn about the story of the fallen immortal in that era. There were a large number of antiques and materials on display in the hall. Most of them were the legacies left by the Dixian in the Tomb of Immortals. That was the evidence that they spent countless efforts to collect in those days. From the Desolation Age to their era, there were all kinds of information. In the guide's skillful explanation, the tourists were immersed in the washing of the long river of history. Mom, when can we get to the immortal trap array? While people were quietly listening to Little He's explanation, the voice of a little girl seemed very attractive. The little girl's mother nodded apologetically to the others, looking very embarrassed. At this time, the tour guide Little He said with a smile, "Actually, I think it's not only this little sister. Everyone should be a bit impatient to see the most important part of this memorial hall. Fortunately, our previous content is basically over. I will take everyone to the immortal trap array to see the living fallen immortal. Please be mentally prepared. Don't be too surprised when the time comes." Along the winding passage inside the Netherworld Mountain, the group soon came to an open and spacious place. Everyone looked below. The man who is sitting cross-legged and motionless is the fallen immortal. His name is Kanglin, and he once forcibly came to 9 regions, which almost caused a great disaster. But don't be afraid, he has been completely sealed, trapped in the gap between time and space. For him, the passing of 10,000 years in the outside world is just like a breath of time. It's just that his breath of time will never end. In a sense, he is actually like a dead person. With that, Little He suddenly landed on the ground, picked up a broken stone, and threw it at Kanglin, who was sitting cross-legged in the distance, which hit him on the head. "Look, there will be no problem." "Ah? We can throw stones?" A tourist exclaimed in disbelief. "What if we wake him up?" Little He said with a smile, "Don't worry, the immortal trap array is still there, so he won't wake up no matter what. Just throw it at ease. He is an immortal after all. With our means, even if we use our strongest spells, we won't be able to hurt him even half a hair." "Is this really possible?" Little He nodded and said, "Of course, don't you see the instructions on the side? It was written by Taoist Master Wang Lu himself, so how could it be fake?" Everyone looked in the direction of Little He's finger and saw that it was written on the wall. "It is shameful to waste food. Please do not throw food at will, or throw stones at will." The handwriting was indeed Wang Lu's handwriting. In addition to throwing stones, you can also draw whatever you want on his body, such as drawing turtles or insulting words. But this will cost extra, and then the staff will bring you up close to paint. If there is a need, you can tell me and I will contact them for you. Because the supply cannot meet the demand, the current market price is 10,000 spirit stones per word. We can keep it for you for the day. Every night, there will be staff to clean Kanglin's body. 10,000 spirit stones per word, just to keep it for a day, isn't that too expensive? He is an immortal after all. To be able to leave words on an immortal, 10,000 spirit stones is not expensive at all. While Little He was bargaining with the tourist, the little girl said loudly, "Mom, I think there are already words on that uncle's body." Little He said with a smile, "Little girl has good eyesight." "That's right, in the beginning, Taoist Master Wang Lu wrote words on his body. We won't paint these words." When he followed the little girl's gaze and saw the words on Kanglin's body, he suddenly felt that he could not continue. The little girl's eyes flashed with innocence. "I know that word, it's the word zheng. But why did he write the word zheng on that uncle's butt? And he didn't finish writing the word zheng. What does this mean?" Next to the immortal trap array, there was dead silence. No one knew how to answer such a question. Chapter 774. Report on the work of Netherworld Mountain Memorial Hall. Hey, last year's annual income has exceeded 10 million spirit stones. In recent years, it has really been operating well. On the stellar peak, Fengyin Taoist Master roughly read the annual work report presented by Netherworld Mountain Memorial Hall. His mouth praised again and again, and his heart was filled with emotion. 10 years ago, the fallen immortal was like a huge shadow that shrouded the hearts of the world. But now, the fallen immortal was displayed in the memorial hall as clay figurines for people to visit, and even ************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************ Only children of the rich second generation could do it. However, the contrast was so great that people who had experienced the past 10 years could not help but sigh with emotion. It was not that no one questioned whether this behavior would create an atmosphere of blind optimism. In the memorial hall, the clown-like Kanglin immortal could not represent the true strength of the fallen immortal. Those who spent 10,000 spirit stones to write the character Zheng on Kanglin's but could never imagine how Kanglin immortal, who only had 30% of his power, was able to deal with the top powerhouses in 9 regions with ease. With such blind optimism, once the crisis came, however, the person who designed this memorial hall also gave a very convincing defense. First, when did the safety of 9 regions depend on those at the bottom who would be blindly optimistic and pessimistic? Whether they were blindly optimistic or pessimistic, what could they do? When the war came, it was not their turn to contribute. It would be a good thing if they didn't add to the chaos. Therefore, instead of frightening them by saying how severe the crisis of the fallen immortal was, it was better to let them write the character Zhang happily. Second, when did it become your turn to tell me what to do with my decision? In the eyes of the knowledgeable people, the weight of the second reason was obviously much heavier. The kid who just entered Yuanying stage 10 years ago had now become the world's #1 expert. In 9 regions he could walk sideways and enjoy unlimited glory. This was actually beyond everyone's expectation. Although everyone already knew that with Wang Lu's ability, he would one day follow in the footsteps of Qin Shi Huang and great ancestor Dusheng, far ahead of everyone else on the path of cultivation. But no matter how they thought about it, it would be decades or even centuries later. After all, it took him more than 30 years to reach Yuanying stage. Even if there was no bottleneck in his void spirit route, and after breaking through the shackles, Wang Lu's cultivation speed was getting faster and faster. However, who would have thought that he would directly open a giant divine weapon at the bottom of the group of immortal tombs, and become invincible from then on? At that time, many young people who looked up to Wang Lu were disillusioned. It was like a hot-blooded and inspirational story where the protagonist went through hardships and obstacles and finally succeeded in his business. When his career began to rise, suddenly, a distant relative left him an inheritance that was enough to buy an entire country. From then on, the protagonist could eat tea eggs and drink cola, a magical Western beverage, every day with ease. This story was undoubtedly to educate everyone that self-struggle was not comparable to inheritance. The implication was too realistic and too dark. However, while countless people were envious and jealous of Wang Lu, they probably didn't know what Wang Lu himself had paid for it. With his qualification, ascending to immortality was by no means the end. Even in the immortal world, he would certainly be able to thrive. Even in Feng Yin's view, those glorious historical figures might not be comparable to him. For example, immortal Qin Shi Huang and great ancestor Dusheng. 20 years of ascension was indeed an insurmountable peak, but did they ever fight against a sage-level enemy in the Shudan stage? Did they ever fight against Dixian when they were in the King Pill? Wang Lu's foundation was so deep that it had already surpassed the predecessors. With such a foundation, his future was really limitless. But now, in order to improve his strength as soon as possible in order to deal with the crisis of the fallen immortal, he locked himself in the giant divine weapon and assimilated with the law left by the predecessors. Although this could rapidly improve his strength in a very short period of time, it also damaged his future because he had lost his own path. Perhaps with Wang Lu's peerless qualification, he could still walk his own path, but it would be far more difficult than it was now. Of course, there was no need to say these words to others, otherwise, it would be hard to avoid the suspicion of showing off. However, the #1 expert in the world, thinking of the dazzling halo that Wang Lu now held and the way he improved his strength, even the generous and simple Feng Yin felt slightly absent-minded. When he came back to his senses, he found that he somehow had a torch and a barrel of fuel in his hand. Strange, is this the temperature of the bamboo room out of balance so I subconsciously want to keep warm? At the same time, in the southern heaven region, near the ruins of the group of immortal tombs, a huge metal puppet was doing incredible dexterity maneuvers in the air. Around it, there was a dense net of thick beams of light, which was like a storm of oppressive force. That huge puppet was thousands of meters tall, and the rain of beams of light not only came from all directions, but the distance between each beam was often only 10 meters or even less. In theory, there was no space to dodge, but the puppet could constantly change its posture to avoid most of the beams of light. A few that could not dodge, in front of the beam of light, opened up a hole in its body, allowing the beam of light to pass smoothly without detonating the huge energy contained in it. For a time, the raindrop-like beams of light fell on the body of the giant divine weapon, but they passed through without any hindrance, causing no harm at all. This dazzling dodging lasted for half an hour, and then the toe of the giant divine weapon burst out a ball of light. After being hit by the beam of light, the surface of the giant divine weapon only flashed a layer of light, which transferred the burst of energy away without any damage. However, the fact that it was hit still made it stop its dodging action, and then its body shrank sharply. A moment later, it shrank into a foot-long model, which was then held in the hand of a young man in a red and white robe. At the same time, the surrounding rain of light also converged and disappeared. Tetragon's sigh followed. It's still not good. If we can't even hold on for an hour with this kind of density, we can't be the main force on the frontal battlefield. Wang Lu, I think we need to increase the intensity of our training a little more. Wang Lu's hand trembled and he almost dropped the giant divine weapon. He said, "Are you done? Do you think the intensity should be increased like this?" Tetragon frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "What else? It's been 10 years, but the synchronization rate still can't exceed 50%. And God knows when the passage between the two worlds will be completely opened. At that time, when the fallen immortals attack, how many can you stop? 1, 2? You're indeed the strongest in 9 regions now, but do you really think that this title can stop the fallen immortals?" This series of doubts was really powerful. After a long silence, Wang Lu looked up to the sky and sighed with an expression of having experienced the vicissitudes of life. King want it again, don't you? Tetragon's face turned red. And then the sky changed color, and lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. "Don't talk nonsense. Who wants it?" Wang Lu sneered and said, "What do you think? Every day you complain that my synchronization rate is low. The problem is, we've been trying to improve the synchronization rate for 10 years, but isn't it still the same trick? If you don't want to use that trick again, why do you have to talk about these clichés? Do you think I don't know what I'm capable of? Or do you think I'll relax and get carried away?" So, in the final analysis, it's you who wants it. After a pause, Wang Lu looked at the blushing Tetragon and earnestly said, "In fact, it's not shameful to want it. It's human nature to eat and lust. As a healthy woman, it's natural for you to have a need. If you tell me directly, I will definitely not refuse you. Of course, it doesn't mean that I'm a very casual person, but this is, after all, about 9 regions. If we do official business, no one can say anything. If you're so tsundere, it's a bit revealing." "Nonsense. You're the tsundere, your whole family is tsundere. I think there's something wrong with your brain." Wang Lu thought for a moment and then said, "It's okay, as long as the key parts are not damaged." "Well, do you want it or not?" "Want your sister? Go to hell." With that, Tetragon shot a purple light at him. Wang Lu leaned his head to avoid it, but when he turned around, Tetragon had disappeared without a trace. Wang Lu waited in place for a while, and then launched his primordial spirit to scan every grass and tree within a radius of thousands of miles. After confirming that there was no trace of Senior Gem Emperor, he sighed wearily and then slowly fell to the ground. As soon as he landed, someone came to find him. What a waste of God's gift. The voice was full of envy, jealousy, and other negative emotions. Moreover, the tone was very familiar. If it wasn't Wang Wu, who else could it be? "It's such a waste for such a good young girl to fall into your hands." Wang Lu righteously corrected him. "First, she only looks a bit petite. Her real age is the sum of our ages, divided by the minimum legal age. It's not illegal for me to push her 1,000 times. Second, she didn't fall into my hands. We're just in a business relationship. Following orders to have sex? You're quite good at finding excuses for yourself." Wang Wu was still gnashing her teeth in hatred. "You're opening a large mechanical man and flirting with a peerless young girl. Don't you think your days are too good?" Wang Lu was silent for a while and asked, "From your tone you also want it?" Wang Wu snorted at this question. Do you still need to ask? I want it at any time. Let's see how much you can give. Let's not talk about a lot. I can give 10 or 20,000. Damn, 10 or 20,000. Are you trying to kill a chicken? Do you know how many mouths I have to feed here? Think about it carefully. If you, the world's number one, can't handle the situation, I'll have to step in when there's a problem. So hurry up and give me 200 million spirit stones. 200 million. I don't have spirit stones, but I do have some others. Chapter 775. In the Spirit Creek town at the foot of Spirit Sword Mountain, the former simple and crude Rue family inn was now a bustling place full of guests. The small wooden building was demolished and replaced by a 10-story high-rise building. Usually each floor was overcrowded. The lady boss was no longer alone in the kitchen of the inn. Wonderful chefs from all over the 9 regions were busy here, providing all kinds of delicious food that could make people's appetite increase. At this moment, in the lobby of the first floor of the inn, there were a few cultivators wearing different Taoist robes chatting and drinking wine. One of them was a young man in a blue and white robe who looked about 25 or 26 years old. He was beaming with joy and enthusiasm. Ha ha ha, you say I'm bragging? If that's the case, then you don't understand me at all. I, Wang Zhong, may not be outstanding in terms of cultivation, but I'm a loyal person. This is publicly acknowledged. My name Wang Zhong was given to me by my young master. The person at the same table suddenly laughed and slapped the table. Ha ha ha, it's as if it's true. What kind of person is Taoist Master Wang Lu? How could he live with you and give you a name? Even if you're dreaming, it's too ridiculous. F***CK. You don't believe me? Then open your dog eyes and see clearly. What is this? Wang Zhong was indignant. He took out a piece of drawing paper from his mustard seed bag, on which there was a row of young people with different expressions. Look, this is the group portrait that Elder Hua Yun made for us after the immortal gathering. See this person? This is me at that time. Next to him is our young master, who is now the famous Taoist master Wang Lu. If we weren't close, how could we stand together? Several of his friends came over to take a closer look and saw a young boy who looked 50 to 60% similar to the current Wang Zhong, standing next to Wang Lu. It was just that. Why does Taoist Master Wang Lu look like he dislikes you? Did you two really have a close relationship with each other? Wang Zhong was anxious. How could it be fake? Look at this. With that, he took out another piece of drawing paper. When we were in the Wang family village, the master asked a painter to draw a portrait of our family. See me? I'm the one standing next to Taoist Master Wang Lu. The few of them carefully examined him and finally found some traces of Wang Zhong's shadow on the dull-looking child. They reluctantly agreed with Wang Zhong's words. Alas, unexpectedly, the number 1 in 9 regions is quite down to earth when he was young. I've always heard people say that Taoist Master Wang Lu is the chosen one of heaven, and that he was born with a strange phenomenon, which he was destined to be extraordinary. It seems that it is just a rumor of the later. Wang Zhong curled his lips and thought to himself, you haven't seen him bickering with the landlord, old Master Wang, in the wilderness of the Wang family village. But now it was not appropriate for him to say anything, so he just smiled and said nothing. But, Wang Zhong, since you were so close to Taoist Master Wang Lu, why are you so miserable now? At that time Wang Zhong felt that his molars were cracked, thinking, this group of grandsons came all the way to Blue River region to get some mileage. They ate and drank from me, but when I boasted a few words at the dinner table, they stabbed my sore spot. It seems that it's really necessary to break up with 1 or 2 people as a warning to others. However, when asked, he couldn't avoid answering. Wang Zhong had to sigh and said, how could an ordinary person like me keep up with the footsteps of Taoist Master Wang Lu? And since I can't keep up, I don't want to drag him down. For me, having a friendship with Taoist Master Wang Lu was a blessing in 3 lifetimes. But for Taoist Master Wang Lu, I'm a complete burden. Although he has always taken care of me, I should have self-awareness. Therefore, I gradually broke up with him, so as not to drag him down in the future. His friends at the table immediately showed infinite respect for him and urged him to drink. Wang Zhong smiled bitterly and drank it, and then began to boast again. Before long, after 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, the group of people had drunk the immortal wine until they were dizzy. Wang Zhong came up and said, "Actually, it's really hard to be friends with Taoist Master Wang Lu. For a dazzling person like him, if you get too close to him, you will be blinded. Not to mention me, this insignificant person. Aren't the situation of the other successor disciples of our Lingjian school the same? Just like senior sister Luli, what a peerless talent. Her brilliant sword heart is powerful. Haven't you all heard about it? But what about now? She was left behind by Taoist Master Wang Lu until her back can't be seen. By the way, Elder Chun, the situation of your Shangjing sect's Chonghua is similar, right? In those days, she was always the first among her peers, steadily suppressing the other lead disciples. What about now?" The cultivator named Elder Chun said with a wry smile, "Now? Right now, even our old Supreme Hichu can't suppress the glory of Taoist Master Wang Lu. So what if senior sister Chonghua is powerful? Speaking of which, Taoist Master Wang Lu is too outrageous. In the bottom of the group of immortal tombs, he went from the number 1 disciple to the number 1 in 9 regions. How could we, who have worked so hard to cultivate, endure this? Forget it, don't say these sour words. Even if that giant divine weapon is handed over to you, can you drive it?" A cultivator next to him shook his head. "I heard my master and uncles mention it when they were chatting." In addition to Wang Lu, I'm afraid there's no third person in the world who can drive that giant divine weapon. Moreover, the leader of the Dixian sect only recognizes Wang Lu. This is not luck, it's all based on ability. But you're right, it's really hard to be friends with such a person. Speaking of which, you just mentioned Taoist Master Luli. I heard that she used to have an unusual relationship with Taoist Master Wang Lu. Is that true? When Wang Zhong heard this question, he couldn't help but think, "You ask me, but who the hell should I ask? I'm just an ordinary inner court disciple. How could I talk to those high and mighty successor disciples? Would they come to me to talk about their emotional problems? Moreover, if Luli really couldn't think it through and came to me to talk about it, I would dare to listen. People who know too much will not have a good end." However, thinking of how he had boasted at the table just now, Wang Zhong couldn't just say that he didn't know. He coughed and said, "In the past, they were indeed close, but now, Taoist Master Wang Lu is, after all, too high and mighty, so their relationship is estranged. The so-called immortal and mortal are different. In fact, it's the same for cultivators who set foot on the immortal path. Taoist Master Wang Lu of immortal level and senior sister Luli, who has just broken through to Yuanying stage, are not people of the same world." Everyone suddenly sighed, and then one of them suddenly said in surprise, "So, does that mean my big brother Zhanzai has a chance? I heard that in the past, he was infatuated with Taoist Master Luli. Now that Taoist Master Luli has been kicked by Taoist Master Wang Lu, my big brother's chance has come." Upon hearing this, Wang Zhong's jaw nearly dislocated, thinking, "Don't you have F***king brain? Saying such treacherous words at the foot of our Lingjian school. Do you think you've lived too long?" At the same time, he was annoyed that he shouldn't have mistakenly made friends with these bandits. These 10,000 arts sect clowns were really a disaster. The next moment, Wang Zhong's ominous premonition unfortunately came true. "You guys seem to be having a good time." Wang Zhong suddenly felt that he was sober from his drunkenness. The voice that came from behind him was so familiar, which had long left a deep impression in Wang Zhong's heart. Even if decades had passed, it would not fade in the slightest. Ma, lady boss. He never thought that the lady boss, who was no longer in charge of the inn's work, would actually appear here. However, the lady boss simply ignored him. Her eyes arrogantly glanced at the clown of 10,000 Arts Sect. "You're from 10,000 Arts Sect? Go back and tell your senior brother to do more things and dream less. At this time, other people can live a befuddled life, but he can't. If you can't concentrate your mind on cultivation, you might as well have a sterilization operation as soon as possible. Your own peach blossom calamity hasn't been cleansed yet, so don't have the idea of hitting other people's women." After a pause, the lady boss continued, "Although that kid Wang Lu is not a kind person, he has always been generous to the people around him. If there's a chance, he would never stand idly by. Therefore, you don't have to worry about whether Lu Li and the others can keep up with Wang Lu. Wang Lu has already thought of a way to help them quickly improve their strength. Not to mention, it's not a problem for them to reach the level of Supreme. With that, the lady boss of the Ru family turned around and left. As she walked, she frowned and muttered to herself, "What the hell, who's that stinking brat in blue and white clothes? He looks familiar, but I can't recognize him." The cultivator of 10,000 Arts sect, who was pointed at by her, suddenly stood up. "You said that Taoist Master Wang Lu is generous to the people around him, so why did he leave Wang Zhong alone? I heard that Taoist Master Lu Li broke through Yuanying stage a few years ago with the help of Taoist Master Wang Lu. And now there's a shortcut to Supreme, so why didn't he consider Wang Zhong?" The lady boss didn't even turn her head. His face value is too low. At the same time, in the Southern Heaven region, Wang Lu, who had just finished his soul-stirring synchronization rate improvement special training, quickly began his new work before he could catch his breath. 10 years had passed, and earth-shaking changes had taken place in 9 regions. However, Wang Lu's busyness had not changed at all. There were still many things that needed him to deal with, and each of them was of great importance, so he couldn't afford to be careless. A cultivator with a rigid and serious expression stood beside Wang Lu and reported, "Taoist Master Wang Lu, the heaven-breaking workshop reported that they are ready to be tested at any time." Wang Lu smiled. "Very good, I'll go now." With that, his figure flashed, and in a twinkling of an eye, he appeared thousands of miles away, in the underwater world of the Red Sea in the eastern border region. After more than 10 years of synchronization with the giant divine weapon, Wang Lu's use of the power of the giant divine weapon had become more and more free and easy. With just a lift of his hand, he had the power to tear the space and penetrate the tunnel. However, if not for this, he wouldn't have come to the Red Sea so casually. This beautiful sea was now one of the forbidden areas of 9 regions, because the workshop on the seabed was busy building the ultimate weapon that could determine the future fate of 9 regions. In the empty and spacious testing area of the workshop, a row of dozens of meters-long metal giants stood quietly on one side. A cultivator in white said nervously to Wang Lu, "Taoist Master Wang Lu, the latest batch of test machines have passed the verification procedure, and now they are waiting for you to personally test them." Wang Lu nodded. "Let's get started." Among the row of test machines, a light blue giant suddenly trembled all over, and its eyes glowed with a glimmer of light. Then it took a step forward, and its heavy footsteps shook the testing area slightly. The giant walked to the center of the testing area, nodded slightly to Wang Lu, and then a sweet and lovely girl's voice came out from it. Senior brother, I'm ready." Wang Lu let out a sigh of relief, and then stretched out 3 fingers of his right hand forward, releasing a golden polygon. "Lu Li, attack me." "Okay." As soon as the voice fell, the metal giant spat out a dazzling light from its palm. Wang Lu frowned slightly, only to feel the pressure on his arm increase sharply. The golden polygon also deformed violently and almost collapsed. "Okay, stop." Wang Lu smiled and took back his absolute domain. Although it was just a casual release, although he didn't deploy the giant divine weapon at this time, which led to only about 20% of the power output, this was still enough to match the supreme level defense. Lu Li could stab the absolute domain with her sword, so her attack power had already firmly stood at the supreme level. Considering that there were still many details that needed to be adjusted, and there was room for further improvement in performance, it could be said that this test machine was a success. And this result was also clearly seen by the other staff in the workshop, and many of them had already cheered. The one who stood next to Wang Lu and was responsible for reporting the results of the work was so excited that his whole body trembled. "Taoist Master Wang Lu, it seems that this time it's really a success." Wang Lu nodded. "Yes, this time it finally looks like it can be used in actual combat." The staff member excitedly asked, "By the way, since this batch of machines can be put into actual combat, then may I ask, Taoist Master, have you thought of a name for this batch of machines?" "Name?" Wang Lu frowned. "These test machines are the mass-produced models that I designed by dividing the fire from the giant divine weapon and combining the resources of the Tomb of Immortals and the Wanxian League. The performance will be worse than the original, but it can be made up for with quantity. In this case, let's call it Zaku." Chapter 776. The Red Sea Underwater Workshop's new experimental machine Zaku has achieved comprehensive success. Good. On the stellar peak, the tired-looking Fengyin Taoist master suddenly raised his spirit and praised it several times. His tiredness was swept away. For a person who continuously dealt with high-intensity official business, it was not easy to find an eye-catching document in a mountain of official documents. In recent years, the work that Fengyin took over became more and more onerous. The Kunlun lenses on the bridge of his nose were changed again and again, and each time it was a bit heavier than before. However, most of the official reports only made people feel worse, and the good news was very limited. In the past 10 years, the world only felt that the world was peaceful and everything was thriving, but they could not see the hidden crisis behind the prosperity. If there was no great crisis, how could the immortal cultivation world be peaceful and prosperous? Even the righteous path and the demons who had deep resentment had put down their contradictions and worked together. If there was no very special reason, how could it be possible? The crisis of the fallen immortals was not alleviated by the victory 10 years ago. On the contrary, it was precisely because the victory against Kanglan came too quickly that it alerted the enemy. No matter how slow and careless the fallen immortals in the upper realm were, after losing a fierce general, they would certainly realize that the current 9 regions was not a fish on the chopping block. Once the fallen immortals took it seriously, how could the current 9 regions have any hope of winning? Over the past 10 years, whether it was the Wanxian League or the Dixian in the Tomb of Immortals, everything they did was to strive for more chances of winning and more hope. Unfortunately, after 10 years, the dark clouds above their heads were still as gloomy as before. Fortunately, the good news from the bottom of the Red Sea could be regarded as a glimmer of light. The first 12 Zaku have all been assigned to their positions. The pilot will complete the initial integration within 3 months. The synchronization rate is expected to reach 20%, and they have the fighting power of deity stage. After reading the report of the Red Sea in detail, Fengyin could not help but push up his glasses. This pair of thick Kunlun mirror was, of course, not to alleviate myopia, but to enable Fengyin to launch his stellar divine eyes with less consumption and to see the accurate future from thousands of cause and effect lines. 12 more soul formation cultivators in 3 months. This new prototype is indeed impressive. By the standard of the fallen immortals, the deity stage cultivators could only play the role of cannon fodder at most. However, considering that this was only 3 months of accelerated training, and the result of a 20% synchronization rate, people could not help but look forward to the situation where the pilot could give full play to the body function. According to theoretical calculations, it will take the pilot 5 to 7 years to reach the optimal synchronization rate. At that time, the synchronization rate can reach more than 70%, and the pilot will possess the combat power of the body integration realm. A few pilots with a high degree of compatibility with the body can reach 90% synchronization rate, and have the combat power of the Deshang stage. Fengyin's eyes flickered when he saw this. As an inferior version of the prototype, the performance limits of this batch of experimental machines were not strong. Even if the pilot reached the theoretical upper limit of 100% synchronization rate, he could only exert the combat power of the peak Deshang stage, which was about the same as the outstanding Dixian cultivators such as Baizé and Black. They were inferior to Tetragon, and there was a world of difference between them and the real immortals. However, the advantage was that the synchronization rate was relatively easy to increase. In 5 to 7 years, the synchronization rate could be more than half. In contrast, as the pilot of the prototype, Wang Lu with his supreme talent, only reached 50% synchronization rate in 13 years. According to the most optimistic estimate, in 5 to 7 years, there will be 12 more Supremes in 9 regions. Although the number is not much, from King Pil Yuanying stage to Supremes in just a few years, I really can't expect more. Unfortunately, according to the analysis of the feedback data from the pilot, Lu Li, it can be determined that the original hypothesis is valid. That is, the pilot of Zaku must meet the following conditions. First, the pilot's cultivation base must be between King Pil and Yuanying stage, which has the best plasticity. Second, the pilot must have Heavenly Spirit Root and excellent qualification, so that the pilot can complete the matching with Zaku in a short time and improve the synchronization rate. Third, the pilot must have a deep foundation, at least with a challenge rating of +8. When he read to this, Feng Yin couldn't help but wryly smile. The first of the 3 conditions put forward by Wang Lu was not difficult. With the vastness of 9 regions, there were countless King Pil Yuanying stage cultivators. However, heavenly spirit root was too rare. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was 1 in 10,000. Only in the top sects of the union of 10,000 immortals would disciples with heavenly spirit root continue to emerge. If it were a middle or low-rank sect, a cultivator with earthly spirit root was enough to be treated as a treasure. In fact, after the Age of Chaos, even natural spirit root was rare in the immortal cultivation world. Otherwise, Shangjing sect's man-made spirit root wouldn't be so popular. As for the third condition, it was even more difficult. The challenge rating +8 mentioned by Wang Lu basically narrowed the choice by more than half. In the vast 9 regions, no matter how rare a King Pil Yuanying stage cultivator was, it could still be found. However, the challenge rating +8 meant that it was close to a whole stage. A +8 Taoist master who had just entered the King Pil stage could already beat an ordinary high-level King Pil Yuanying stage cultivator. This kind of fierce person was basically at the level of the lead disciple of a top-rank sect. Although there were many sects in the Wanxian League, there were only a few top-rank sections. And the lead disciple of those sects might not necessarily have the cultivation base of King Pil Yuanying stage. 100 people. Feng Yin Taoist master thought for a while. Combined with his current situation and his stellar divine eyes, he quickly made a judgment. If all the forces in 9 regions are mobilized, we should be able to gather 100 qualified people. And 100 Supremes and even Dixian stage cultivators are a powerful force that can't be ignored. The only question is whether the output of the Red Sea Underwater Workshop can keep up. In order to make these 12 zakas, the Wanxian League had already spent a lot of resources. More importantly, the core fire that made up the zakas was separated from the prototype by Wang Lu, and only he could produce it. According to Wang Lu, this separation was more similar to duplication, which would not hurt the source. However, the process was very complicated, very laborious, and the result was not stable. The type of fire produced was highly random. Some were powerful and some were simply waste. These 12 zakas were the enhanced type that Wang Lu had accumulated for 5 years. However, it was impossible for Wang Lu to spend all his time separating the fire, so the production limit was very serious. However, just as he thought of this, Feng Yin saw that in the report Wang Lu wrote, as the core component of the giant divine weapon, the quality of the fire is very important. The next step will be to try our best to improve the quality and production of the fire. Wang Lu wrote this part roughly, but Feng Yin Taoist master could see from the short text that Wang Lu was probably going to make a big move next. The words "try our best" were not written casually. After thinking for a long time, Feng Yin Taoist master commented on the report, "This work is well done. I hope that the next work will be carried out in an orderly manner to ensure the effectiveness." After writing this report, Feng Yin Taoist master sighed, took off his glasses and decided to take a break. However, at this time, a golden flying sword flew over with a thin document. Request for instructions on the suspension of business in the Netherworld Mountain Memorial Hall? From Wang Lu? In the long night, in the deep darkness without a trace of light, a glimmer of light finally appeared. His instinctive yearning for the light caused the prisoner in the darkness to subconsciously approach it. However, behind the light was a figure that he hated to the bone. "It's been a long time, Senior Kanglin. XXXXXXXX. Calm down, speak human language. Howling like a baboon now won't help you improve your condition. Or are you in heat again and need me to write a few more words for you?" As soon as he finished speaking, the volcano in the darkness was extinguished. Kanglin stopped howling and said coldly, "What are you doing here? I want to ask you something." "You think I'll answer? Then I'm here to write." "What do you want to know?" Wang Lu asked. "What's going on in the immortal realm?" Kanglin glanced at Wang Lu and did not answer. Wang Lu asked why you can't answer. "You're restrained from divulging relevant information? It's not surprising, but I'm curious, is 9 regions worth so much attention for you guys? It's just a novice village. In terms of the surrounding spiritual energy, it can't be compared with the immortal world before the Age of Chaos. Now it's simply a wasteland. In terms of vast land and abundant resources, it is rumored that the immortal world is vast and boundless. 9 regions is just a drop in the ocean in the immortal world. In terms of the quality of talent, all the people in our continent together may not be able to beat a great principal golden immortal. I don't know what the highest realm on your side is, so I'll just call it golden immortal for the time being. So what are you guys doing here? Refining this world and turning it into a sacred magical tool? Killing all the creatures in 9 regions to refine a demonic treasure? But when I saw that you guys destroyed the demon world, there was no follow-up action. I really can't figure it out. After a series of questions, Kanglin still didn't say a word. Wang Lu smiled and said, after saying so much, you can't even answer a single question? It seems that the organization discipline on your side is quite strong, so let's talk about something easy. In your opinion, what do you think of my current strength? Kanglin chuckled and said nothing. It doesn't seem to be that good? But it doesn't look too bad, at least it's worth your time. So, what if I say that I can be 10 times stronger now? Kanglin was silent for a moment and then said, it doesn't make sense. Yes, a mere 10 times can't form an absolute crushing. However, it sounds like as long as I'm 10 times stronger, at least in terms of one-on-one fighting, it's enough to be on the stage. Kanglin shook his head and said, it doesn't make sense. Wang Lu ignored him and just speculated about his response and tone. Under the ideal condition of 100% synchronization rate, my fighting capacity can be about 2 to 3 times that of yours. I can occupy an absolute advantage and even kill you in seconds, but my strength is still on the same level. If this level can be on the stage, it seems that your group of fallen immortals is only 1 or 2 stages ahead of us, not as strong as we think. Is this because you guys are also a very weak group in the immortal world? When it came to this issue, Kanglin became silent again, but there was a slight change in his demeanor. Wang Lu asked again, speaking of which, there's one more thing that I find strange. You bunch of good-for-nothing scums do whatever you want in the lower realm. Is there no one who cares about those great principal golden immortals, supreme immortals, and the like? 9 regions has the Wanxian League, and the Western continent has the Holy Light religion, but there's no governing body like the Heavenly Court in the immortal world? Kanglin was still silent. TSK, you don't know anything and you refuse to say anything useful. It's all based on my subjective guess. In that case, it seems that there's no need to liberate you from this memorial hall. You can continue to meditate here for people to write. See you in 10,000 years. Wait. Chapter 777. Since ancient times, the Southern Heaven region had been a remote border region in the corner of 9 regions. It was once known as the Desert of the Immortal Cultivation World along with Blue River region. There were only a few talents in the vast land, and the strength of Beastmaster School could be called a local tyrant. Later, the Lingjian School appeared in Blue River region, and the title of the Desert of the Immortal Cultivation World was finally taken off. The Southern Heaven region was even more unique. After the entrance to the group of immortal tombs was opened, it once became the hub of 9 regions. In terms of prosperity and change with each passing day, even the central region was not as good as the Southern Heaven region. However, since the group of immortal tombs was fully developed 10 years ago and the treasures at the bottom came out, the Southern Heaven region had turned from prosperity to decline, like a depleted gold mine. The prosperity of Plentiful City and the City of Immortals continued habitually, but it was weak, and the gradual decline had become a foregone conclusion. Until 3 years ago, the large area of the group of immortal tombs in the Southern Heaven region was designated as a controlled area overnight. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter and exit at will, and many industries in the city were forced to move out. Although the Wanxian League would give compensation, the Southern Heaven region had completely declined. Because this change came too fast, the economic bubble of the group of immortal tombs burst ahead of time. Because of this, there were countless people who hanged themselves. The famous cliff in the Southern Heaven region often saw people jumping off the cliff like dumplings, which could be regarded as a spectacle in 9 regions in recent years. Because of this serious consequence, the Wanxian League, which issued the ban, naturally had to bear the pressure of public opinion. Even if the person who issued the ban was jointly signed by Wang Lu and Hichu, it could not stop the mouth of the people in the Southern Heaven region. For this reason, in the high-level meeting of Heavenly Sage Hall, the elders from the Southern Heaven region repeatedly launched an attack against the motion of Shangjing sect and Lingjian school. There were even signs of unrest among several immortal cultivation sects in the Southern Heaven region. However, what the Southern Heaven region could do was only this. Perhaps 10 years ago, they could still use various resources to protect their own interests. Now, however, when the joint document of Wang Lu and Hichu was issued, this matter was the general trend, and no one could stop it. The current Wanxian League was far more powerful than 10 years ago. It could command the world and no one could disobey it. Because the current Wanxian League had mastered a superpower that could shake the world. Bai Zhe, you still won't give up. On the grassland, Bai Zhe's lonely figure seemed especially small. Compared to 10 years ago, he seemed to have aged a lot, but his eyes still contained a bright light, showing that he had not lost his sharpness. Instead, because of the 10 years of tempering, he had become more reserved. However, the woman in front of him was as beautiful as she was 10 years ago. Her face was perfect and flawless. Faced with his old friend's question, Bai Zhe chuckled. It's not about giving up or not giving up. I'm just doing what I should do. What's the point of wandering aimlessly on the grassland? Bai Zhe, everyone is waiting for you. I know. Bai Zhe's smile didn't change. Did Liu Biechen help you find me? Otherwise, how can we find you if you hide so deeply? Xian Mo was a little angry. You still can't accept us joining the Wanxian League? If you agree to bet, you must accept to lose. There's nothing unacceptable. We lost the grand competition, and the Wanxian League has been recognized and inherited by the boss. Even Tetragon is dead set on Wang Lu's side. Under such circumstances, what else can we do but join? You made the right choice and did not use your precious power for internal friction. This remark slightly startled Xian Mo. Bai Zhe was right, but it was not like what Bai Zhe would say. In her memory, Bai Zhe was a straightforward person. When he encountered something, he would deny it first. He rarely recognized anything and rarely recognized anyone. Many people used to call him a mad dog. If it weren't for the fact that this mad dog was also the loyal dog of Sun Buping, he would have been pushed out long ago. However, now it seemed that Bai Zhe had changed a lot. Xian Mo was silent for a while and then asked, Do you blame Tetragon for banishing you and me? How could I? At that time, in that environment, Tetragon just made the most correct choice. It can only be said that Black's calculation was too deep, which made her lose her mind. However, for Black to be able to do that, it was my responsibility. If I had the highest veto power at that time, he would not have dared to be so unscrupulous. Since you don't blame Tetragon, what exactly do you want to do? As I said, I'm doing what I should do. When the boss asked me to be his deputy, he needed me to check and fill in the gaps for him. His kindness to me is as heavy as a mountain. Even if I die, I can't repay his kindness. But now, although I don't want to admit it, Wang Lu has received the inheritance of the boss, so I regard him as the new boss. Xian Mo was even more surprised when he heard this. Bai Zhe's hatred for Wang Lu and his master Wang Wu was so strong that it could be said that they could not live under the same sky. Unexpectedly, after 10 years, he had become so open-minded. He is the successor of the boss. Even if I have hatred in my heart, I will endure it. Bai Zhe explained. In that case, there is no reason for you not to come back. On the contrary, because the current Wang Lu does not need me by his side. He is the successor of the boss, but he is not the reincarnation of the boss. Do you think he needs a noisy person who keeps telling him what he did wrong? Xian Mo was stunned. It was indeed hard to imagine that Wang Lu would allow others to casually question him. In a sense, Wang Lu was much more headstrong than Sun Buping. It's not headstrong, it's just a difference in the style of doing things. He doesn't need others to deny him because he can do it himself. So, even if I go back now, I can't do anything. Instead, I will annoy my companions because of my habit. So why bother? But, Bai Zhe interrupted Xian Mo, what do you think of our situation now? Xian Mo sternly said, It's very serious. Yes, it's very serious. In my opinion, it's not surprising that the fallen immortals would swarm in at any time. 10 years ago, they defeated Kanglin, which must have alerted the upper realm. Maybe it's not that. Don't lie to yourself. Baizé suddenly raised his voice and said, think about the layout of the fallen immortals when we were asleep. Do you think they are a group of brave but not astute boors? Do you think they are a mob without any strategy or planning? Even the loss of a loyal dog can attract Kanglin in the first place. Do you think Kanglin has no backup plan? That's why we should gather our forces to deal with the crisis, isn't it? So what if we gather our forces? Will the Wanxian League lack my strength now? The mass-produced giant divine weapon that Wang Lu recently took out can have a fighting power that is not inferior to mine when its performance is exerted to the extreme. And that batch of mass-produced giant divine weapon is 12 of them. What is a mere Baizé? You can't count it like that. Yes, because Wang Lu definitely has more than one card in his hand. I still remember 10 years ago when you just surrendered to the Wanxian League, you were still a bit condescending and felt that you were condescending. Now, how many of you still don't know what's good for you? Xianmo was silent. As Baizé said at first, when the whole Dixian people surrendered to the Wanxian League, although they didn't say it, their hearts were indeed not convinced. Even if it was Tetragon's order, plus Wang Lu had the inheritance of Sun Buping. However, it was not so easy to make a group of Dixian people, who were at the peak of the Mahayana realm, surrender to a group of later generations cultivators who were only half a step away from the Mahayana realm. However, in the next 10 years Wang Lu's means became more and more numerous, especially his own strength became stronger and stronger. With a synchronization rate of 50%, he was able to crush any cultivator in the world. Thus, the voice of dissatisfaction was much less. Baizé said, my own strength is insignificant compared to the whole, so instead of joining the whole, it's better to do something that can only be done as an individual. I believe that for Wang Lu, he is also happy to see someone who has nothing to do with him help him do something. Although Baizé's words didn't say it clearly, how could Xianmo not hear the true meaning behind the words? What the hell are you doing? Baizé said, think about it, after Kanglin was suppressed, what could the upper realm have done in the past 10 years? Although they didn't forcibly cross the passage between the two worlds again and send new fallen immortals, there must be other actions. For example, have you ever thought about how much of 9 regions has been infiltrated by them in the 16,000 years that we have been sleeping? How many traitors are there lurking in the shadows like black? And in the past 10 years, how much influence have they exerted on 9 regions without us noticing? Hearing this, Xianmo was secretly shocked and said, you already know? Unfortunately, it's not clear, at least not completely. Baizé shook his head and said, but there are already some clues. For example, when Kanglin came 10 years ago, perhaps there was another person who came with him. What? Hey, you said there was another person who came with you? In the Netherworld Mountain, Wang Lu was quite surprised by this answer. Yes, but I don't know who that person is. According to the rules, when something happened to Black, I should be the only one who came to the lower realm in an emergency. But when the passage opened, I seemed to see someone coming behind me. Well, since you can say this, it means, well, that person came against the rules, so his existence will not be protected by the rules. Wang Lu pondered for a moment and said, in your place, are the rules a very strict thing? Can't say? Then let me ask another question. In your impression, are there many people who might do things that violate the rules? Not many, but I can't accurately judge his identity. Then what do you think is the reason why that guy came to 9 regions secretly and didn't do anything for 10 years? Perhaps he was scared. Because you were suppressed, so he was scared? Could it be that simple? At that time you were besieged and annihilated because you were not in a good state. But after 10 years that person should have fully recovered, right? How could a complete fallen immortal be so cowardly? I don't know, maybe it was just my illusion at that time. The conversation in the dark paused for a while, and then Wang Lu faintly said, in any case, this information will be credited to you. Then, the prisoner in the dark was suddenly full of expectation. From now on, the price of writing on your body will be raised to 50,000 spirit stones per word. What? This is to use economic means to regulate market behavior. Don't worry, your life will be much better. Chapter 778. The 10 years after the suppression of Kanglan Immortal were the most glorious 10 years of the Wanxian League. After the Wanxian League was fully subdued by Dixian, the power of the immortal cultivation world became highly centralized. The Wanxian League was in charge of the world and the life and death of the immortal cultivation world. No wonder some people would sigh and say that this was the best 10 years but also the worst 10 years. The immortal cultivation world had never been so prosperous. The overall cultivation base of the cultivators had advanced by leaps and bounds, and the production of elixirs and magical treasures had doubled. However, it had never been so restricted. Every move of the sect was controlled by others, and their independence and autonomy were suppressed to a tragic situation. Many elite disciples, who were regarded as the future hope of the sect, were directly transferred by the Wanxian League and joined other organizations. Even the executives of the sect would be transferred by the Wanxian League. Some weak sects would often be supported by powerful personnel. It was just that the arrival of powerful personnel was often accompanied by the weakening of the original power. The immortal cultivation world suffered such a strong turbulence that the voice of opposition was naturally needless to say. However, this system was still strongly implemented. In the final analysis, it was because of two words: wartime system. 10 years ago, the invincible and tyrannical strength of Kanglan Immortal was no secret in the high-level circle of the Wanxian League. Thinking that there would be dozens of such enemies in the future, and each of them would be in a complete state. No matter how much 9 regions did, it would not be too much to be extreme. According to Wang Lu, this kind of planned economy under the wartime system was undoubtedly effective as a short-term stimulant. Of course, the side effects were also unquestionable, especially when he himself had to spend a lot of energy to improve the synchronization rate of the giant divine weapon and to make the fire seed. He could only rely on the management of the Wanxian League more. However, not all of the elders of the Heavenly Sage Hall could keep up with Wang Lu's thinking. Their actions were often rigid, and their decrees were often out of shape. Sometimes Wang Lu had the time to correct his mistakes. Sometimes, he was pestered by Tetragon to undergo special training for many days. Since the decree had already been issued, it was not appropriate to withdraw it at will. He could only go with the flow. With the vastness of 9 regions and the high centralization of power in the Wanxian League, there were so many official affairs that needed to be dealt with that it was impossible to examine them one by one. But this time when Wang Lu saw the report, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A report on strengthening the spiritual civilization of the Wanxian League? Let me see. TSK. Strengthen cultural control and create a harmonious and progressive cultural atmosphere. Severely crack down on all kinds of negative culture and purify the cultural environment. Which King idiot came up with this? Hearing Wang Lu's impolite words, Hai Yunfan shook his head helplessly and said, "It's Supreme Jury. TSK, sure enough it's him." Wang Lu sneered and said, "After living for hundreds of years, has his brain become a fossil?" Hearing this, Hai Yunfan felt a little cold sweat on his back. In 9 regions there were only a few people who dared to be so rude to several top supremes, and Wang Lu was undoubtedly the most rude one among them. When he was still a cultivator of King Pill, he had already served as the chief planner of the organizing committee. With the support of Hichu Daoran, he was lawless. Now, he was the number 1 in 9 regions, so of course he had no scruples in doing things. Once he made up his mind, even Hichu Daoran could not stop him. Of course, Wang Lu was not unreasonable. As long as he was willing to communicate with him seriously and persuade him to agree, he would make concessions and compromise. However, in 9 regions there were not many people who dared to talk in front of him and try to persuade him. And of course, Hai Yunfan would always be one of them. Although Supreme Jury's thinking is a bit rigid, I think he did the right thing this time. It's necessary to strengthen thought control in the wartime system. Didn't you do the same thing in the grand competition? Little Hai, you're actually comparing me to Jury. Wang Lu closed his eyes and shook his head. Of course, it's not wrong to strengthen thought control. The mistake is that the method is clumsy, which makes people disgusted, and then backfires. How did I do it in the City of Immortals? Can Jury really copy it? With his means and IQ? Moreover, the most critical problem was that, in the grand competition, the opponents were clearly in front of us. Those ancient Earth immortals would compete with us every day. However, we could use victory after victory to stimulate everyone and let them forget the unhappiness for a while. But now, can you catch me a living fallen immortal to brush up the honor? The one in the memorial hall was almost broken by me. No matter how I humiliate him, the people can't get more stimulation. So tell me at this time, what can I do to make the people forget the inconveniences of the wartime system? Hai Yunfan was silent for a while and then said, although the current management method is indeed rough and lacks flexibility, it is undeniable that the efficiency of the immortal cultivation world in 9 regions has doubled, and everyone has benefited. The problem is that this wartime system has been in place for nearly 10 years. Everyone has long been accustomed to this efficiency and takes all kinds of benefits for granted. It is far from enough to persuade the people to accept the wartime system. I see. Wang Lu said, do you understand? What is most needed now is the blossoming of 100 flowers in culture. We should strengthen the role of entertainment and let the cultural field become a channel for people to relieve stress. However, Supreme Jury is simply going in the opposite direction. So do we need to issue a new decree? Forget it. Changing from Qin to Chu will only further damage the prestige of the Wanxian League. Just let this matter go. Tell Jury to stop as soon as possible, and let the construction of spiritual civilization come to an end. The next step is to set things right, restore those things that have been seized, and quickly stop the new 9 regions' dream-themed activities. Right now, I don't have time to care about the specific affairs of the Union of 10,000 Immortals. Tell them that there are some things that they would rather not do. Otherwise, when I'm free, I don't mind a purge. Wang Lu said it indifferently, but Hai Yunfan could hear the bloodshed in it. After 10 years, Wang Lu was no longer the original Wang Lu. Although he was still warm and generous to his friends and did not bother about trifles, the heavy majesty was more and more unbearable. The number 1 person in 9 regions was really not a joke. Wang Lu said, apart from that, is there anything else recently? Hai Yunfan thought for a moment and was about to report something, but then he changed his mind and said, no, it's not a big deal. But will you be very busy recently? According to Kanglin's confession, I'm afraid there is a fallen immortal who has been hiding in 9 regions for 10 years. Do you think I'll be very busy in the future? What? Don't shout so loud. At present, this matter is still a top secret. There are no more than 10 people who know about it. Well, including the secretaries of the high-level officials, there should be no more than 20. I don't know why that guy has been hiding for 10 years without doing anything, but I can't just leave it alone. Hai Yunfan was a little worried and said, how sure are you? If we gather all the forces at hand to encircle a fallen immortal, we have more than 90% chance of success. But the problem is that we can't find his position. The enemy is in the dark while I am in the light. How sure do you think I am? So now we need to investigate, but we can't do it in a big way so as not to alert the enemy. Do you need anything from here? I'd be thankful if it doesn't cause me more trouble. If I see this kind of report again, I can only put down the fallen immortal first and come back to seriously reorganize the management team of the Wanxian League. At the same time, in a certain immortal cultivation sect in the central region, a young and beautiful sect leader was looking at a stack of golden paper in her hand in confusion. What does this mean? Replying to sect leader, this is a notice issued by the Wanxian League not long ago, requiring all the major sects to do a good job in the construction of spiritual civilization. There are many specific requirements in it. I have drawn the more important ones for you. The sect leader shook her head and said, No, I'm not interested in how the Wanxian League bureaucrats are going to waste people and money. What they want us to do, you just pretend that we have done it and then write a report and submit it. What I care about is that my question just now has not been answered. Tell me, my favorite novel magazine, why is it suddenly gone? Didn't I say that I would buy it as soon as it was released and put it in my room? The subordinate was silent for a while and said, that magazine has been discontinued. Discontinued? The sect leader's eyes widened in disbelief and said, why? Isn't the sales very good? Anyone who likes novels will buy it. Because the Wanxian League said that the theme of that magazine does not meet the requirements of the construction of spiritual civilization, so it was killed as a warning to others. What? The young sect leader was stunned on the spot and couldn't say a word for a long time. The cultivator, who was the sect leader's secretary, who stood in front of her, could understand the blow the sect leader received. Speaking of which, this sect leader was really a strange person. She had a delicate and lovely name, Xia Xiaohe. She was originally a loose cultivator in the central region. 10 years ago, she met the former sect leader while he was traveling. Because they had similar interests, she was pulled into the sect as a guest elder. A year later, the former sect leader passed away in an accident and passed on the position of sect leader to her before he died. After she took over the sect, she didn't carry out any drastic reform and was willing to be the sect leader. It was not that her talent was limited. In fact, this woman who reached the deity stage in less than 100 years of cultivation was much more powerful than the former sect leader. The problem was that her personal quirks were a bit special. According to the popular saying in 9 regions, Xia Xiaohe was an incorrigible otaku. In the past 9 years as the sect leader, she spent most of her time in her bedroom reading novels, listening to music and playing games. She enjoyed the prosperous and developed entertainment culture of 9 regions to the fullest. She was so happy that she forgot everything and forgot everything else. Were it not for the former sect leader who left behind a set of management team with strong executive power, perhaps even the sect would decline. For such a serious otaku, her favorite novel serialization was suddenly cut short. The blow she suffered could be imagined. Of course, there were all kinds of voices in the sect regarding this nerdy sect leader. However, no matter how the people below cursed silently, a deity transformation stage expert's cultivation was enough to make up for all the shortcomings of a middle or lower tier sect. It was just that, if Xia Xiaohe could get rid of these bad habits, that would be even better. The ban of the Wanxian League had caused a lot of criticism in 9 regions. However, in the view of the people in the sect, if the sect leader could get rid of the otaku and begin to concentrate on handling the sect's affairs, that would be a boundless merit. Therefore, the secretary didn't try to wake up the stunned Xia Xiaohe, but just secretly looked forward to it. This time, her favorite serialization was cut short because of the ban of the Wanxian League. If she could repent and turn over a new leaf, that would be great. Just like that, after no one knew how long, Xia Xiaohe finally regained her sanity. Speaking of which, time flies. The secretary was stunned, not understanding what the sect leader wanted to express. In the blink of an eye, 10 years have passed. Alas, I only care about enjoying myself and simply lose my will. Now that my favorite novel is gone, I have to do something serious. The secretary was naturally overjoyed, but for some reason, she felt a slight chill around her. Chapter 779. On the Sky Cloud Road in the central region, a slender cloud ship traveled through the white clouds like lightning, which attracted many people's admiration. In recent years, the development of the Sky Cloud Road was really fast. The so-called Sky Cloud Road, as the name implied, was a road built above the clouds. The surrounding spiritual energy along the way was bound by an array and flowed in a specific direction. Cultivators could use spiritual energy to fly with twice the result with half the effort. On this principle, a high-speed cloud boat was designed to travel back and forth along the Sky Cloud Road. Its speed was comparable to the full flight of a peak deity stage cultivator. Moreover, it was safe and comfortable, far more relaxed than a cultivator flying alone. With a reasonably priced ticket, whether cultivators or mortals, they could board the high-speed cloud boat and go to a distant foreign land. The Sky Cloud Road was first built based on Shangjing Sect's 9-region strategy. With Shangjing Sect as the core, it radiated to 9 regions and extended in all directions, which greatly stimulated the commercial prosperity of the central region. Later on, all the major sects in the 9 regions realized the benefits of the Sky Cloud Path, and thus one after another built the Sky Cloud Path, which was connected to each other. It was just that the construction cost of the Sky Cloud Path was too high. Except for Shangjing Sect, this kind of rich and imposing sect, the general sects really couldn't afford it. Therefore, except for the several main roads belonging to Shangjing Sect, the level of the Sky Cloud Road in other regions was uneven, and the coverage was also very limited. However, in the past 10 years, with the vigorous implementation of the Wanxian League, the Sky Cloud Road has been greatly developed. The total length of the cloud road and the number of clouds doubled every year. and it has gradually become an important transportation channel in 9 regions. At that moment, within a spacious cloud boat, 2 cultivators, one male and one female, were seated in a VIP box near the window, conversing in hushed tones. There were only 2 of them in the large space, but their voices were very low. Additionally, there was a look of vigilance and wariness on their faces. These 2 people were Dixian Baizé and Dixian Xianemo. According to our calculation, which one is after the 8 wastelands in Blue River region? The Mount Chi school in the central region, and then the Pingle sect at the foot of Mount Chi. Are you sure you want to look for them one by one? What else can I do? Baizé asked. Do you want the fallen immortal to walk into the trap by issuing an announcement? Or do you want to recruit the power of the Wanxian League to help us investigate? I understand, but if we continue to look for them like this, it won't be long. Baizé paused and then repeated, it won't be long. I have a hunch that I will meet the fallen immortals soon. As soon as he finished speaking, both of them felt the cloud boat beneath them tremble slightly, and then a clear voice of a woman resounded from the ceiling of the room. Dear passengers, we have arrived at Chishan Station. Please bring your carry-on luggage. We've arrived? That's fast. Xianemo could not help but sigh. Even in our era, the continent did not have such a convenient and fast sky cloud road. Baizé smiled, carried a large bag of luggage, and walked out of the private room. By the way, remember our identity. Xianemo took a step forward and held Baizé's arm. I know. We're newlyweds in a travel wedding. I don't need you to remind me repeatedly. You, on the other hand, be careful not to expose yourself. Dixian, disguised as husband and wife, soon came to the first stop of the trip, Mount Chi School, along the spacious and bright road. As one of the 10 famous mountains in the central region, Mount Chi covered an unusually vast area. The area within a radius of thousands of miles was counted as the boundary of Mount Chi. Although Mount Chi School was named after Mount Chi, it did not occupy all the land. In the rolling mountains of Mount Chi, there were dozens of small and medium-sized sects that coexisted in harmony with it. However, under such a distribution of forces, the management of Mount Chi was relatively loose. The scenery of Mount Chi was beautiful, and the 10 sceneries on the mountain were famous in the 9 regions. There were often loose cultivators who came here to look for scenery and fate. As long as they did not overly violate the interests of the local sects, everyone would let them be. Therefore, on this day, the newlyweds who came down from the firmament cloud boat did not attract anyone's attention at all, because on the same cloud boat, there were hundreds of tourists who disembarked from the Mount Chi station to see the scenery. After leaving the cloud boat, most of the tourists followed their respective tour groups into Mount Chi and visited the local scenic spots in turn, while a few cultivators with higher cultivation base could travel freely. The scenic spots of Mount Chi had been developed for many years. Except for a few remote places, most of the areas did not have tyrannical strength. There were also prominent signs in the dangerous areas to remind tourists to mistakenly enter. Of course, every year there would be adventurers who overestimated their capabilities. Their cultivation base was mediocre, but they loved to take risks and indulged in the dream of immortal fortuitous encounter. Without listening to any warning, they rashly entered the dangerous area of Mount Chi, and then were trapped in the dangerous area, helplessly asking for help around them. There were dozens of large and small immortal cultivation sects in Mount Chi, and the distress signal could easily reach the mountain gate of a certain sect. However, the locals also had an unwritten rule about this. Disobedient tourists should be let die in the mountain and turned into fertilizer. There was no need to waste manpower to rescue them. Only when more people died could they teach future generations enough lessons. On this day, Mount Chi seemed to have ushered in a pair of tourists who overestimated their capabilities. A pair of newlyweds with foundation-building cultivation base carried heavy luggage bags. After walking for a short distance on the mountain road of Mount Chi, they turned a corner into the dark mountain forest road. Soon their figures were covered by the lush mountains, and they disappeared without a trace. Every year Mount Chi, like a man-eating beast, would swallow hundreds and thousands of reckless tourists. Every year, this mountain area with a radius of thousands of miles could get fertilizer for chi cultivating, foundation building, and even shoot on stage. Therefore this scene was not unusual. However, few people knew that shortly after the newlyweds entered the mountain forest road, they showed a tyrannical strength far beyond the imagination of the world. They strode toward the real forbidden area of Mount Chi as if they were walking on flat ground. The first stop is Mount Chi School. Their sect is at the main peak. Do we need to get close? Baizé pondered for a moment and said, no need. Although it's just a middle-rank sect, our goal is the immortal in the upper realm. We should be careful. No, if the other party is an immortal who has recovered all his power, it's useless to be careful. It's better to be a bit more generous and approach them. Test the other party's reaction. Not afraid of alerting the snake? Alerting the snake is indeed troublesome. No, in the past 10 years, the Wanxian League has not been idle. Judging from the power in Wang Lu's hands, if it's just a fallen immortal, he should have the confidence to win. If we can successfully scare the snake out, it might be a good thing. While exchanging opinions with Baizé, Xianemo could not help but sigh in his heart. In the past 10 years Baizé had changed a lot. Once upon a time he was still a reckless man, but now he seemed to have matured a lot and was a partner who could make people feel quite secure. Actually, it's not a big deal. Baizé smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly and said, I just give myself a veto every time I want to speak. Give yourself a veto first? That's right, I know very well how stupid, reckless, and straightforward of a piece of trash I am. Most of the decisions I make based on my own thinking are wrong, so all I have to do is use a single negation to reverse them. This is the so-called negative is positive. Xianemo was really speechless. Was this a great enlightenment or self-abandonment? Well, it's close. Mount Chi School is just ahead. Do you feel anything? Xianemo swept away the distracting thoughts in his heart, took a breath of the fresh mountain air, and slightly operated his immortal spirit. He gathered the golden liquid immortal spirit at the tip of his nose, which strengthened his sense of smell to an incredible level in an instant. After a long time, Xianemo said with a little hesitation, there is no smell of fallen immortal, everything is normal. Baizé was about to nod, but he frowned again. He suddenly raised his hand and lit up a light. The light was not strong, but in the eyes of Xianemo, it was unusually dazzling. It was the light that belonged to the eruption of immortal spirit, which might not be noticed by ordinary cultivators. However, any cultivator who had reached Mahayana stage and began to transform their magical power into immortal spirit form would be very sensitive to this special fluctuation. Baizé's words were like a roar in the ears of everyone who possessed a fairy soul. In today's 9 regions apart from Dixian, only a few peak supremes, such as Hichu and Tianluan, had immortal spirit. Although Mount Chi was located in the central region, it was obvious that there would not be a peak supremes. Baizé's immortal spirit eruption would naturally not be perceived by anyone, unless the person he had been looking for a long time was also in Mount Chi. Baizé intended to beat the grass and startle the snake to the extreme. Taking advantage of the fact that Xianmo's sense of smell was also in its peak state, he wanted to force the fallen immortal out in one breath, even if it was just a trivial flaw. However, after the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the immortal spirit on the other side of Xianmo had gradually dissipated, and they still didn't get any result. Xianmo was a bit frustrated and said, so, it seems that we don't have to go to the next few stops in Mount Chi? Just now, Baizé's immortal spirit eruption affected a range of hundreds of miles. As long as the fallen immortal was within the range of Mount Chi, he should be able to perceive it. Baizé himself frowned and said, I really want to admit that this operation is probably going to be fruitless, but based on the consideration of negative is positive, it seems that I should persist at this time. For Baizé's negative is positive, Xianmo was both angry and amused at the same time and said, then shouldn't your current idea also be positive? Baizé was stunned and immediately fell into an infinite loop of logical contradiction. However, before Xianmo could help him untie this knot, a chill suddenly surged from the bottom of her heart, which made her subconsciously move. Her body rushed forward and held Baizé, who was in a trance, in her arms. Then, her momentum didn't decrease but increased. With the magical ability of so close, yet worlds apart, she rushed forward thousands of miles in an instant. However, when she landed, Xianemo was horrified to find that she had actually returned to the starting point. The next moment, a soft voice came from behind her. "Hey, didn't you come to me specifically? Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" Chapter 780. At Mount Qi in the central region, the undercurrent surged in the tranquility. Under the faint killing intent, the two Dixian immortals felt the hair on their back stand up at the same time and their immortal hearts shook. At the critical moment, Bai Zhe did not hesitate at all and said, "Xianemo, I'll use countercurrent, you run away quickly." "Countercurrent?" Xianemo was shocked. "If you know the price is high, then don't waste my time." Bai Zhe roared and 12 golden seals appeared around him, which shone with dazzling brilliance at the same time. Countercurrent, reversing the flow of time, negating the passage of time. It was the most powerful move in Bai Zhe's negation immortal technique. However, any immortal technique that involved time and space had great restrictions. Although Bai Zhe's countercurrent had the wonderful effect of reversing the flow of time, the effective range of countercurrent was limited. It could not encompass the world and could only be limited to a specific space. Moreover, within the range of the immortal technique, the more powerful the individual was, the more difficult it was to reverse the flow and the weaker the effect. With Bai Zhe's ability, if it was used against an ordinary person, he could easily make them go back 100 years and turn them into nothingness. However, if it was used against an opponent of the same level, let alone reversing the flow of time, it was difficult to even fix the opponent. As for using countercurrent against a stronger opponent, the ineffectiveness of the immortal technique was already considered light. A little carelessness would lead to the collapse of the immortal spirit and the burning of the internal organs. However, apart from this move, in the face of a perfect fallen immortal, the two had no other way. Xianemo knew that Bai Zhe was determined to sacrifice herself, and the more time she wasted, the greater the pressure on Bai Zhe. After experiencing the cruel war 16,000 years ago, Xianemo of course would not be unreasonable. She operated her immortal spirit and threw out the yin and yang division immortal technique, trying to isolate herself from 9 regions and enter an independent plane. This ingenious use of yin and yang division could be regarded as one of the best escape techniques. However, the immortal technique was like a stone sinking into the sea. The surrounding space seemed to be locked by some powerful spell and remained motionless. At the same time, Bai Zhe also let out a muffled groan. His countercurrent immortal art was disrupted halfway through its preparation, and naturally dispersed. "You're really stupid. You clearly know that I've locked the space here, so why do you still dare to come here so foolishly? You should know that immortal arts and divine abilities are ineffective in the face of higher-level immortal arts and divine abilities." As he spoke, a young girl that was delicate and beautiful like a summer flower strode over from the sky. She looked to be around 15 or 16 years old, had a flawless and bright appearance, eyes that were lively like water, and the corners of her mouth were brimming with a trace of a smile. But when combined with the current situation, it caused others to feel slightly terrified. A fallen immortal girl who locked the thousands of miles of Mount Qi and forced the 2 Dixian immortals into a dead end, while talking and laughing was certainly worth shuddering in fear. 16,000 years ago, too many of his comrades in the Dixian camp were annihilated by the smiles of immortals from the upper realm. The exalted immortals wreaked havoc in the lower realm, like hunters hunting. Every time they drew their bow, they were filled with the joy of harvesting. As the hunted party, there was no room for resistance. Just as Bai Zhe and Xianemo were thinking quickly about how to destroy both good and bad together, the young girl chuckled and said, "Don't be so nervous. If I really wanted to kill you, I would have done it a long time ago. I'm sure you won't even have a corpse left. Why wait until now? Well, relax a bit. Do you want some tea?" 3 cups of fragrant tea appeared beside the young girl's hand, floating quietly. "Hey, you don't want to drink it? This is the immortal tea that I brought from the upper realm. Legend has it that it can make a mortal become an immortal in one mouthful. Of course, in fact, this kind of tea can make an immortal become an immortal in a short time. Even in the upper realm, they would still be reduced to hard labor, ha ha ha. But you don't have to worry, this cup of immortal tea is of great benefit to you. It's not a hard labor tea. Do you really not want to try it? After Bai Zhe and Xian Mo were silent for a long time, Bai Zhe took half a step forward and said, "What exactly do you want to do?" The young girl said, "Of course I have something to tell you. Well, let me introduce myself first. I'm Xia Xiaohe, a resident of the immortal world, a fallen immortal in your eyes. But there's no need to be so nervous. I've never made a move against your people. There's no deep hatred between us." Xian Mo sneered and said, "Oh, even if you didn't make a move, the hands of your companions have long been stained with the blood of the creatures of 9 regions." Xia Xiaohe shrugged and said, "What does that group of barbarians have to do with me? Don't be angry at me for no reason, okay? Being so irritable will push the friendly side to the opposite side." Friendly side? Bai Zhe frowned and said, "Among you fallen immortals, are there people who are friendly to 9 regions?" Xia Xiaohe said with a smile, "Why not? You guys have dealt with us so many times, so you should know that there are all kinds of people among the fallen immortals. There are madmen like Bailey too, and there are also villains like Kanglin. Of course, there are also beautiful and kind female immortals like me, so it's not worth making a fuss about." Bai Zhe snorted and didn't answer. The Bailey too that Xia Xiaohe mentioned was one of the nightmares of the Dixian people in the past. He had a tyrannical immortal technique and a cruel and bloodthirsty temperament. No one knew how many companions of the Dixian people died in his hands. Indeed, if Xia Xiaohe was like Bailey too, then he and Xian Mo would have been dead already. How could they have the leisure to chat with the other party? "What exactly is your so-called friendliness?" Xian Mo asked. "In the past 10 years, you have been lurking in 9 regions with unknown intentions. Is that your way of showing friendliness?" Xia Xiaohe said with a smile, "It's much better than Kanglin's direct action, right? Compared with him, I neither killed your people nor insulted your mother, and I even offered you immortal tea. Isn't that enough friendliness? Do I have to give birth to your children to prove my sincerity? Moreover, if I announce my identity as a fallen immortal as soon as I come up, I'm afraid I'll have to accompany Kanglin in Netherworld Mountain right now, right? What exactly do you want to do?" "I want to save you guys." Xia Xiaohe blinked her bright eyes and said with sincerity, "Actually, I didn't agree with their Great Purge plan from the beginning." "Great Purge? It means to kill all of you, as the name implies." Xia Xiaohe wrinkled her delicate eyebrows and was a little unhappy to be interrupted. "I think we're all adults, so there's no need to be so extreme in doing things. However, I actually don't know much about you guys. So, when Kanglin went to the lower realm last time, I followed him. Seeing is believing. I have to see it with my own eyes to know what kind of judgment is better." "So, you've been lurking in 9 regions for 10 years? Xian Mo asked with some difficulty. Xia Xiaohe said with a smile, "Yes, I snatched the position of the sect leader of Pingle sect, and have been the sect leader in the center of 9 regions for 10 years. Hearing this, Bai Zhe frowned and said, "You're the sect leader of Pingle sect who hasn't gone out for 10 years? Xia Xiaohe was a little angry out of shame. "What's wrong with not going out? Don't you understand the truth that an immortal knows everything in the world without going out?" With that, her expression suddenly changed. "Moreover, if it weren't for these 10 years, do you think you would have the opportunity to talk and laugh with me here? Although I oppose those Great Purge plans, it doesn't mean that I have any good impression of you. Don't forget that 16,000 years ago, you killed my companions." Xian Mo couldn't help but say, "Your companions killed more of our people. So what? Does it have anything to do with me?" Xia Xiaohe shrugged and said, "I just came here out of curiosity, but by chance I came into contact with your entertainment culture. Novel serialization, pop music, movies and television animation. It's really an eye-opener. Unexpectedly, there are so many wonderful things in a small 9 regions." With that, Xia Xiaohe raised her willowy eyebrows and said, "Such a beautiful cultural achievement. Yet someone intends to casually purge it. It's simply a heinous crime. I, Xia Xiaohe, am the first one who can't bear it." Upon hearing this, Bai Zhe and Xian Mo's jaws were almost dislocated. A fallen immortal obsessed with the nerd culture? Moreover, because of her obsession with the nerd culture, she even wanted to protect the 9 regions. This is really seeing the expressions of the two people. Xia Xiaohe could not help but sigh and said, "It seems that you are also vulgar people who don't know how to appreciate the entertainment culture. Sad, really sad. But I still forgive you. After all, without mediocre people, how can I reflect my superiority?" Xia Xiaohe smiled and said, "In short, I want to save you now." "How?" Bai Zai asked. "Can you persuade others to give up the Great Purge?" "Of course not." Xia Xiaohe looked at Bai Zai as if she was looking at an idiot and said, "I told you earlier, there are all kinds of immortals in the upper realm. There are only a few who are reasonable, kind and beautiful like me. Otherwise, there would be no Great Purge in the first place. Then, do you think that a madman like Bailey too is a reasonable person? Is it possible to persuade him with words? Then how are you going to save him? Stand on our side and fight side by side with us?" Xia Xiaohe simply turned around and didn't look at Bai Zai. Instead, she asked Xian Mo, "Is this the kind of IQ that you used to fight against us? That's amazing. Think about it, why should I stand on your side? How could a pure, kind, and beautiful fairy like me turn against my friends and family for the sake of entertainment and culture? What's even more hateful is that you guys don't want to develop the entertainment culture. Instead, you guys want to build spiritual civilization and purify the cultural environment. Purify your mother." Xia Xiaohe cursed. "You've caused all the novels I've been reading to stop. If it weren't for the fact that I had saved a few complete books, I would have returned to the upper realm and waited for their purge." Thinking that the fate of the 9 regions had almost fallen into the abyss because of the accelerated spiritual civilization, Bai Zai and Xian Mo were filled with emotion. After a long time, Xian Mo asked softly, "So, how do you plan to save us?" Xia Xiaohe said with a smile, "It's very simple. All of you in the 9 regions surrender to me, become my subjects, and receive my protection." Chapter 781. Surrender to you? Xian Mo shook his head in disbelief. She had long felt that there was something wrong with Xia Xiaohe's brain, and now she was more and more convinced of her judgment. Could it be that this seemingly pure and lovely girl was like her boss in the past, accidentally hit her head when she went down to the lower realm? In her impression, although there were many kinds of fallen immortals, there was really no one like Xia Xiaohe who had such a strange mind. In 9 regions, perhaps only that pair of master and disciple could be comparable to her. Bai Zai, on the other hand, looked calmer. He stared at Xia Xiaohe with a serious expression, waiting for her further explanation. "What's with that expression of yours? Do you think I'm a retard? That's rude." Xia Xiaohe looked offended and troubled. "I'm seriously pointing out a bright path for you, but you actually treat me like a retard." Bai Zai rubbed his temples in pain, trying to relieve his headache. This was a habit that he developed when he was immortal, which had been corrected for a long time after he entered the immortal path. But now he could not help but pick it up again. "If you don't mind, please explain it to us in detail." "Very well. Your understanding is really low." Xia Xiaohe was a little unhappy. "First of all, to be clear, you can't win this game. No matter how hard you struggle, you can't change the difference in strength between the two sides. We can easily find a dozen or 20 people like Kanglin, not to mention that there are also many people who are above Kanglin. Once the passage between the 2 realms is opened, you will definitely lose." Xian Mo opened his mouth to refute, but he was choked by Xia Xiaohe's words. "Respect each other's IQ. In the face of the power of the upper realm, you have no chance." At that time, it was only a small part of the power of the upper realm that suppressed you. After the passage between the 2 realms is opened, the upper realm will dispatch its main force. Bai Zai asked, "So if we surrender and pledge allegiance to you, we will be safe?" "Yes, isn't it very simple, very practical, and very tempting?" Bai Zai ignored Xia Xiaohe's words and went straight to the heart of the problem. "How can you protect us? According to you, the upper realm is determined to get the 9 regions, and there are even many people who support the Great Purge plan. There are only a few people who hold the same view as you, and you might even be the only one. What right do you have to go against the general trend? It's very simple because this is the rule. As long as you surrender to me, you will be my private property. And to casually invade my private property is tantamount to invading me. Immortals were not allowed to attack each other at will. This was an iron rule that the upper realm had adhered to for billions of years. Based on this, I am confident that I can protect you. How can there be such a good thing in the world? Do you think we're idiots? You've never ascended to the immortal world. How do you know there's no such good thing? Xia Xiaohe rolled her eyes at him and then explained, the purpose of the upper realm's descent is for the 9 regions, and you, the creatures of the lower realm, are just accessories. A few people who are good at refining immortal treasures with the flesh and blood of living beings are interested in you. But in the eyes of most people, you are like mosquitoes entrenched in a treasure. It is enough to get rid of you, but there is no need to kill you. If someone is willing to step forward and take you over, of course, no one will deliberately embarrass you. So, the immortals of the upper realm want us to leave 9 regions? But the hundreds of millions of creatures in 9 regions have lived here since the creation of the world. Where else can we go? The Western continent? Xia Xiaohe shook her head and said, the Western continent is not a paradise. They face the same situation as 9 regions. Don't worry, since I want you to surrender, I naturally arranged a home for you. I have a small place in the immortal world that has always been empty, which can be used to settle you. A small place? An immortal cave? Bai Zhe asked in disbelief. What kind of immortal cave can accommodate so many creatures in 9 regions? Moreover, you have such a big place. Why is your immortal world obsessed with 9 regions? It can't accommodate all the creatures in 9 regions. Xia Xiaohe lightly said. It can only accommodate hundreds of thousands of people at most. Hundreds of thousands? Are you kidding me? Do you know how many creatures there are in 9 regions? Xia Xiaohe said, what does it matter? Most of the creatures in 9 regions are non-human creatures, and most of the human beings belong to the mortal world. The number of cultivators is about 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 1,000. At the same time, most of the cultivators are just dregs to make up the number. They are either heresy with artificial spirit root or waste with mixed spirit root. The life and death of these people are irrelevant, and there are only tens of thousands of people who are really useful. I've left 10 times as much space here. I beg to differ with your idea. Xia Xiaohe said with a smile, beg to differ? Then what do you want? My space is so big that it will be full of hundreds of thousands of people. If I don't choose the best immortal cultivation talents, should I choose a group of mediocre fools? Or should I simply choose a group of pigs and dogs? Do you think that's appropriate? Kick your friends and relatives and the most elite talents in 9 regions into the abyss and then let a group of animals survive? You seem to be more ruthless than a great purge. Or do you still hope that 9 regions can get through this crisis unscathed? Don't be so naive, okay? Even if you use your knees to think, you know that it's impossible. The disaster has come, and all you can do is to minimize the loss as much as possible. In the past, you have experienced great events, so you should be able to think about this issue clearly, right? Of course, Bai Zhe and Xian Mo were able to think about it clearly. In theory, Xia Xiaohe's words were not wrong. It was just that it was really not easy to accept it. After a long time, Xian Mo softly said, even if only a few 100,000 people can be saved, it's still better than being wiped out. But what will happen to these hundreds of thousands of people after they enter your small world? What's in your small world? There's nothing at all. Xia Xiaohe shrugged. It's just a desolate desert. There's neither surrounding spiritual energy nor the fragrance of flowers. Everything needs to be built from scratch. There's no surrounding spiritual energy. That's why I said let those scum cultivators who can't generate their own magical power die. I'm counting on you, a group of decent cultivators, to help me improve the environment. For people like you who are close to ascension, you don't need to rely on the nourishment of the surrounding spiritual energy. Instead, you can create the surrounding spiritual veins with manpower. When the time comes, you can build your own world and I won't interfere. Xian Mo was silent. Bai Zhe raised a more acute question. Can those who surrender to you retain their freedom? That depends on how you define freedom. In my small world, I don't care what you want to do. But other than that, don't think too much about it. Just live there with peace of mind. Then, wouldn't we become birds in a cage? Otherwise, do you still expect to fly freely? How could that be considered as defecting and pledging allegiance? Even if I can accept it, those immortals who are waiting to use you to refine blood spirit immortal treasures can't accept it. You can protect yourselves because you've become my possession, so don't neglect the essentials. Bai Zhe couldn't help but laugh. In conclusion, we have to sacrifice the land of 9 regions and almost all the creatures. And then the rest of us give up their freedom and face to become your pet in a cage? Don't you think this is a joke? Xia Xiaohe seriously said. Then the other possibility is that you lose your land and the lives of all the people. What freedom and what face are all gone. From then on, there will be no trace of your existence in the world. Which one do you think is better? Bai Zhe was silent. Xian Mo looked at Bai Zhe with a complicated heart. After thinking for a long time, she decided to follow Bai Zhe's judgment. She decided to trust Bai Zhe. Should she wisely choose a path to live an ignoble life, or go to the end with a bang? At this time, Xia Xiaohe said, to be honest, if it weren't for my wonderful life in 9 regions in the past 10 years, I wouldn't even bother to give you this opportunity. Although that small world is small and barren, it is, after all, my treasure. Why should I take it out for you to use? And these words, I will only say them to you because I think that you are, after all, still the object of rational communication. If it were someone like Wang Lu, I would not say a word of nonsense to him. Upon hearing this, Bai Zhe could only sigh in his heart. If it were Wang Lu, he would never talk so much nonsense with Xia Xiaohe. As soon as they met, he would fight to the death. He was such an arrogant and unrestrained leader. In contrast, Bai Zhe had suffered setbacks since the grand competition and had become accustomed to humiliation and compromise. Xia Xiaohe did find the right person. After an unknown period of time, Xia Xiaohe became a bit bored and said, "Hey, have you thought about it or not? Don't tell me you're stalling for time. My immortal technique will not give you a chance." As she said that, she simply took out a novel and began to read it, showing that she was not in a hurry. And this attitude also made the balance in Bai Zhe's heart gradually tilt to one side. What's the situation in Mount Qi? Is there an end to that place? Every day, it's either a territorial dispute or a rescue for those idiots. Hai Yunfan looked at the report presented by his secretary and complained impatiently. The several secretarial cultivators standing below suddenly trembled with fear, and no one dared to answer even half a word. As one of the most powerful cultivators in 9 regions, Hai Yunfan's aura was so fierce and threatening. At present, his main job was to assist Wang Lu in dealing with those chores that did not have enough weight. Considering Wang Lu's current status and the high centralization of power in the Wanxian League, the documents that needed to be reviewed by Wang Lu could pile up like a mountain every day. Wang Lu himself had recently shifted his focus to the giant divine weapon, so more work could only be handed over to Hai Yunfan. Even though Hai Yunfan had been supported by Wang Lu in the past 10 years and had reached the peak of King Pil, and his primordial spirit was extraordinarily tough, however, dealing with thousands of documents every day still made him feel tired. In particular, most of these documents were empty words and nonsense. Almost 1/3 of them were useless reports about important speeches and the implementation of the spirit of a certain meeting submitted by the various sections. 90% of the words in the whole document were meaningless, which made people's anger rise. And now, the report on the situation in the Mount Qi area also made him feel very impatient. The sect leader of Mount Qi school was like a psychopath, writing a report at the slightest sign of trouble. Now, he inexplicably said that there seemed to be a change in the surrounding spiritual energy in the mountains and suggested further observation. It would be abnormal if there was no change in the surrounding spiritual energy in the thousands of miles of spiritual mountains. Couldn't he write something useful? Thinking of this, Hai Yunfan shook his head and directly wrote the word, "read" on the report. He then signaled the people below to file it and not circulate it to a higher level. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.